Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of this video series I'm putting together to go through the texts of a manuscript called the Kolbrin. Today's video will be part 2 of the text where it's related to Osiris and a group called the Sons of Fire. So the previous video was part 1 where we went through a few stories about Osiris, which included the events after their exile from the fabled garden, where a storied character called Herthu, who seems to represent Osiris, was born in the garden, and he's the one who essentially picked up the torch and helped establish the human race after the catastrophe where they were exiled from the garden. But now, for those of you who have watched the previous videos, like I discussed in those videos, a lot of the Genesis stories are essentially speaking of the same catastrophe where the fabled garden is related to the biblical flood, where in reality that's what happened, where it seems like there was a cosmic impact which caused a flood felt around the world. And that's happened at the time where the people had become corrupt, so it was seen as a little bit of a reset. So today we'll be going through some chapters which seem to describe some more factual writings about the Sons of Fire and Osiris and what they did following the biblical flood, which includes their travels to the eastern quarter. And then we'll finish with the next video, which will be where we'll go through additional stories about Osiris, which includes some writings from Moses. So like I like to do during these videos is, since I'm including music from other people to go through the opening passages, it's kind of my version of, when you go to church and stuff, you have like gospel music. So, but for those who have seen the previous videos, I like it. It's a way to start the video with having you, the viewers, actually read through some of the passages. And my intent is to include music that I enjoy, but at the same time, I think that the music goes well with the passages to help set the tone about what the video is about. So I'm not sure how many people recognize that song. The intro song is from a PC game called Diablo, but it also appears in Diablo 2. Like I said in the previous video, I did end up playing quite a few PC video games when I was a kid. And so actually the version that I included, so the song is called the Tristram Town Theme. And, as much as I like the original, I really like the cover by someone called Alina Gingertail, where it's, I would say like it's better than the original. It's really good. That's why I said here, her cover is fire. Anyways. But yeah, like I said, I feel like the song fits the tone and the passages that we're going to read in this video, where Osiris and the Sons of Fire visit the eastern quarter. And the reason I included this passage here where it says, "Many died in the harbor of sorrow, for it was a place with a curse upon it, which caused an evil sickness. The Sons of Fire came with Hoskaya and saved them, and they came to this place and built a city." So Hoskaya is the name of, it's one of the names that Osiris goes by. Again, like for those who watched the previous videos, that's one of the difficulties with reading through the Kolbrin, is that there's all sorts of names which have no clear link to people that we know of today. But through doing a lot of detective work, it's possible to link all the stories together. And so in the previous video, we read a story of a character called Hoskaya who represents Osiris. So here, like we said, we'll read through some chapters about how the Sons of Fire went to the eastern quarter following the flood. And I included a link to the song in the description for those who'd like to listen to it. It's a song that I often listen to just at home. And anyways, I just included here a picture. So this is from Diablo 1. This is the town Tristram. Like I said, it's brings back memories from when I was a kid. So before we jump into specific chapters, I just want to give a little bit of background. So, while Osiris did a lot of the heavy lifting to help raise humanity out of the Stone Age, he did not do it by himself. Like all humans, Osiris, despite being a great prophet and one of the greatest prophets to have ever lived, despite that, he was a mortal human being. And so he knew that he had to establish an inner circle of sorts with enlightened humans to protect the truth and knowledge of the sacred writings in a world filled with primitive humans. And in addition to that, like we've discussed in the previous videos, Osiris was alive and captained one of the ships that survived the biblical flood, which was caused by a cosmic impact. So that was another big mandate of the Sons of Fire, was that, they essentially, I guess you could say that they had three mandates. One, preserve the sacred writings of the knowledge of the higher wisdom of how ultimately, as human beings, we have a soul. It's an eternal soul. And that the purpose of life is to live our life in a way where our soul learns and grows, so that after death it becomes worthy of living in the light side of heaven. And so that was one of their mandates. Their other mandate, like I said, was that after the flood, they recognized that since there were relatively few survivors, as we'll read today, they knew that they wanted to spread their advanced knowledge, where this advanced knowledge was essentially considered Neolithic era knowledge, such as agriculture and metalworking and things like that. But then, their third mandate was, since Osiris and the few survivors had survived the biblical flood, they essentially wanted to preserve this idea, because they ultimately didn't completely understand what happened. Us today, we're able to understand that, with our scientific knowledge today, we understand that there's like asteroids and comets and the whole universe out there. But for them at the time, they wanted to preserve this knowledge that, oh my gosh, like it's possible for this, cosmic impact to happen, which could just completely devastate the world. So essentially, I guess you could say in a way that those were the three main mandates from the Sons of Fire. So we'll go through that today. So I'll read through the passage here. It says, "Mortal knowledge is circumscribed by mortal ignorance, and mortal comprehension is circumscribed by spiritual reality. It is unwise for mortal man to attempt the understanding of that which is beyond his conception, for there lies the road to disbelief and madness. Yet man is man, and ever fated to reach out beyond himself, striving to attain things which always just elude his grasp. So in his frustration, he replaces the dimly seen incomprehensible with things within his understanding. If these things but poorly reflect reality, then is not the reflection of reality, distorted though it may be, of greater value than no reflection at all? This, then, is how these things were told in the great book of the Sons of Fire. There are no true beginnings on earth, for here all is effect, the ultimate cause being elsewhere. For who among men can say which came first, the seed or the plant? Yet, in truth, it is neither, for something neither seed nor plant preceded both, and that thing was also preceded by something else. Always there are ancestors back to the beginning, and back beyond that there is only God." So this helps to illustrate that ultimately these Sons of Fire had a real understanding of the complexities of life on Earth, and how the spiritual reality that is beyond Earth is meant to be purposely veiled. And I like this passage here. Essentially, it's a version of the chicken and the egg, and the book of creation being possibly, amongst the oldest of the writings within the Kolbrin. I would say that this preceded the expression that we know today of what came first, the chicken or the egg. So even though there was a long lineage of twice-born prophets from before the biblical flood, where it seems as though Thoth was the high priest of the prophets from before the biblical flood, we're going to go through the passage below here, where it really does seem as though the secretive society known as the Sons of Fire was established by Osiris after the flood. So here it says, "Kings came and departed to their place. They ministered unto the people according to the light revealed unto them. Most knew only the veiled truth, but in olden times there were better kings than in later days. There were long generations of men who walked with wisdom, and among them was the generation of the first great master, he who established the brotherhood of the chosen ones in light." So here, that's the thing, like for the Sons of Fire, there's a few different references throughout the Kolbrin, which essentially is different names given to the same secretive society. And what's interesting, so here this is a chapter that was written later in ancient Egypt, so it's making a reference to the first generation of Osiris and the Sons of Fire. And we'll be going through texts from this first generation after the flood in today's video. But yeah, the passage continues here. It says, "In those days, men learned the rites for coming forth by day, but the inner wisdom was not declared before them. Yet they were days of wisdom, skill, and knowledge. But the knowledge of the Spirit still languished, and the sacred secrets remained hidden. In fact, never have they been revealed to the multitude of men, for never has the multitude of men been worthy." So we'll understand that a little bit better after going through the passages today. But to completely understand, like, we'll have to go through, most of the passages of the Kolbrin. But essentially, like we'll see today, is that, while the Sons of Fire travel to different areas, such as the Eastern Quarter, to establish a city and teach the people, they always taught the general people a little bit of light. But as it says here, most only knew the veiled truth, whereas the sacred secrets remained hidden by the secret society of the Sons of Fire. So like I said, there's several chapters of the Book of Sons of Fire that speak of their travels to the Eastern Quarter, where their intent was to establish a city among the tribal people who may have been at or near what is present-day India. And so, again, I mean, like, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a historian or anything like that. But ultimately, like we read in the previous videos, the civilization from before the flood had great ships, and some of the people had survived on these great ships. So that's the thing, is that after the flood, they seem to have visited a few different areas, and we'll be reading today chapters where they went to the Eastern Quarter. And I just wanted to include this map here because, I think it's quite apparent that they were established with the people who later became ancient Egypt. And there's actually also, in the previous video, in the story about Hoskaya, it makes a reference to Hoskaya being an Ethiopian, which I think would kind of make sense. I guess it's a little bit cut off here, but Ethiopia's here. So, that's the thing. I would presume that this is, despite it seeming a little bit, this kind of goes against our current understanding of ancient history, because this, like I said in previous videos, could have been up to 12,000 years ago. But just looking at the map, it's quite, I think it's plausible where if they were in these areas, they would have traveled on their ships down here and probably, to some degree followed where they would have seen the land. And I mean, the thing is that, like, I know that, the imagery would have been different 12,000 years ago because the Earth goes through processes. But I find it quite interesting. Like I said, it makes sense that they went to Egypt in the Nile Delta because you can see all the greenery here, because they would have relied on things like agriculture. It also makes sense that maybe they would have established themselves down in Ethiopia here, because here, with all the mountains and stuff here, there would be areas with greenery. And then if ever they traveled and sort of followed along the shoreline here, whether or not they had explored in here or not, here we see in India that this is the beginning where they make a reference in the chapters that we'll be reading about the harbor of sorrow. And so I think it's plausible that during their travels, they may have ended up maybe in an area like in this bay or this bay where, after traveling, it would have been an area in calmer waters with greenery, which could have been a sign for them that the soil is able to produce things like agriculture. Okay, so today we'll start with reading through chapters describing the Sons of Fire in the Eastern Quarter. So we'll be going through 4 chapters of the Book of Sons of Fire. So they're all called the Rolls of Record, but different numbers. They're all in in order. Where in the previous video we read chapter 7 of the Book of Sons of Fire, which was the Rolls of Record 1. And we'll also go through 2 additional chapters in the Kolbrin. So one is chapter 3 of the Book of Sons of Fire. That's called the Brotherhood, which is the Brotherhood of the Sons of Fire. And we'll read another one called the Book of Kadmis, which is another one which helps to describe the human beings who are part of the society of the Sons of Fire. Okay, so we'll be going through chapter 8 of the Book of Sons of Fire, called the Rolls of Record 2. So this second of the Rolls of Record is likely more historical documentation than a story. And so Hoskaya, who represents Osiris and his allies within the newly established Sons of Fire, really do seem to have made an effort to pass along their wisdom across the world. So, like I said before in the introduction, this chapter, as well as other rolls of records, takes us to the Eastern Quarter. Now, as we'll read through these chapters, it seems as though Osiris was not initially part of this journey to what may have been at or near present-day India. So here we'll just go through the passage here. This is from the Rolls of Record 7, so not this particular chapter, but just to highlight that Osiris did eventually make his way to the Eastern Quarter. So here it says, "We know about Lothan and Cable Kai, designer of houses who sailed around the edge of the earth. They gathered the records, which were in Kindia, and carried them the long sea journey, believing their records safer among the barbarians than among those who sought to destroy them. Many died in the harbor of sorrow, for it was a place with a curse upon it, which caused an evil sickness. The Sons of Fire came with Hoskaya and saved them. And they came to this place and built a city." So that's the thing, again, we'll have to read through the chapters, but in this particular chapter, we don't read about Osiris. Initially, it is Lothan and Cable Kai who journeyed there. But as we read in the later chapter, Rolls of Record 7, Hoskaya later came to save them. Because that's the thing, the reason it's called Harbor of Sorrow is that, as we'll read in this chapter, they had quite a difficult time in this area. Okay, so the first passages of this chapter help describe how Lothan, who was essentially the leader of the first group of Sons of Fire who went to the Eastern Quarter, about how him and his crew sailed out in 5 ships. And it notes that their ships could carry things like cargo, food, animals, and other items, like an ark. So then passages 2 and 3 provide a long list of what they brought with them on their ships as they sailed east. And then passage 4 notes how they navigated their ships. So I'll read through those passages. And so this first passage here, it's kind of more of just an initial note or declaration by the scribe who wrote this chapter. So it reads here, "Lothan, captain of men of valor, victorious over the sons of the new moon, and guardian of the hidden wisdom, maker of roads in the red lands, and builder of the secret fort. By Abisobel, once scribe of the god Eloah in Ladosa, keeper of records in the new temple, to his fathers in wisdom at the temple of Iswara, greetings. May you live long on earth in prosperity, peace and health, and depart in knowledge." And like I mentioned in all the videos, there's a lot of random names of either people or places which have no clear connection to what we know of today. So I'll do my best in terms of pronouncing them, but I'm not the authority on how these should be spoken of, like phonetically kind of thing. So yeah, just a note on that. And then so passage 2 here reads, "We left the good land, hearts heavy laden with grief. The ships were 5, and I looked to mine and found it good. It was built of allen wood and stout masted. All about it, casks were lashed. Along the planking, the cords that moved were free, but all clear spaces were filled with things wrapped about and bound." So just a note before we move to the next passage. So as we'll see as we read through this is part of the reason why it really seems like this is more factual information, because it speaks in the where it's kind of personal writings, right? Where it says, "And I looked to mine and found it good," as opposed to in a story. So the passage continues here. "There was much leather for the sails and leathern scoops. There were 50 score of large buckets of wood, hooped about and handled with plated leather. Between the eyes of the ship, the guide pole was raised, beneath which were stored all kinds of unusual things made of wood and cordage, used by men of the sea. There was a machine for slinging stones and another for hurling fire. There were high shield guards, which could be strapped to the side. A store contained every kind of weapon and much armor. There was a store behind the mast, and in it were over 50 jars of oil, and not less of wine and vinegar, casks of food, there were, and more stored in baskets. Many large pitchers were lashed about, and dried meat stored in cloth. Dried dates and figs and small fruits there were in large quantities. Water was not lacking, nor the dishes for eating. There were nets for fishing and hooks for catching birds. The chief among the men of the sea was skilled in the notched stick called Thumb of the Night, which guided him across the widths of the sea. We brought up against Keftor, where Nabam departed, for they were troublesome. Men of Melkat came, who had been wrecked, and we took a score, who were men of valor. We passed many lands by the sea, where once broad sea-girt Posidma reigned, before blown apart by underworld fires. By the lands of Hogrim, we went over the wide sea to the gate of Ethesian, and beyond it, across the sea of Tepuim. So I just want to highlight here where it says, the chief among the men of the sea was skilled in the notch stick, or a stick called Thumb of the Night, which guided him. So anyways, I'm not sure if there's any historians who could maybe determine what that specific tool was, but that's the thing I find fascinating is that it helps to illustrate that they probably had some what would seem as primitive tools to us today in terms of made of wood and stone, but it really shows a level of intelligence where they were able to use these tools to navigate across the waters. So next we see how in passages 5 and 6 it notes that on their journey one ship with 40 men and the households of 6 men were lost, and another ship was grounded. Some men died in battle and some to sickness. However, they finally found a place to build an encampment. So we'll read here, it says, "One ship and 40 men and the households of 6 men were lost on the way. 3 ships have I left, with one brought up to the land. 12 men have I lost in battle, and 10 have gone with sickness. There are with me 200 fighting men, 110 men of skill, and 100 bondsmen. 60 households with their cattle and sheep and corn and tools and wagons. Ethesian things with us are numbered, and the tally grows daily. The encampment is well made and encircled with a wall where water does not lie. Trees and soil are the materials of its construction. Great trees are about us, but no stone for building, for the soil is deep. The waters rise not over the fields, where men have cut water passages, but there is much rain." So here it helps to describe their encampment and the sorts of materials that they used. So as we'll see, this chapter does describe what must have been a very difficult life for Lothan and his crew. They were used to a different climate, and the locals in this area were different than those that they were typically accustomed to. So we'll see that as we go through the chapter here. So passages 7 to 14 describe the interactions between Lothan's people and the locals, whereas we'll see some locals did join Lothan, and overall Lothan worked to establish a city and a temple. So it says here, "Wild men are in the land, who write on their skins. They are hairy ones, whose gods are the plants of the field. Their quarters are like baskets over the ground, and they are unwashed. The women are like hellcats, uttering wild cries among the trees, but the men are quiet and come in silence. They have temples of poles, roofed over in part and encircled by great logs, with logs laid over. Skins and painted leather are hung about, but no cloth. They place plants on altars, that their high gods may consume the essence of life within them and draw it back into themselves. Virgins they keep in cages. Why, I know not, but the women in cages are virgins and well cared for. Is virginity uncaged like a hound unleashed? The wild men are unlearned and without soft speech. They are cousins to the wild dog, yet with children they are gentle. It continues here. The children of Fickle, the stoneworker, were lost among the trees, and wild beasts beset them at night. The wild men found them there and carried them away and fed them. Then came the search band of men of valor upon the place, And the children, seeing them, ran away from the wild men. The men of valor slew the wild men, thinking they had taken the children, for they knew not their speech. Since then we have seen their ways. 110 of the wild people we have as bondsmen and bondswomen. The men work with the soil and wood about the encampment. The wall I caused to be built out into the water, and it encloses a pier against the bank, where ships can moor. So yeah, there's a lot to digest in these passages where it's quite fascinating. That's the thing. Like if these texts in the Kolbrin are authentic, this really does push back our knowledge of written history back thousands and thousands of years. Like, it's essentially, I mean, yeah, I mean, here it kind of shows maybe what was the strange customs of the more primitive humans that they were observing, where, it says virgins they keep in cages. Why, I know not. And here, the reference to the wild men are unlearned and without soft speech. So I think this illustrates that, like us today, how we speak would be considered soft speech, but these more primitive humans were probably just more yelling and things like that. But what I find very fascinating here is how essentially the passage describes how children of someone who was called Fickle, the stoneworker, had become lost in the trees. And then it looked like there was, wild beasts, like animals that put them in danger. But so yeah, essentially it seems like the wild men had found the children and they were actually taking care of the children. And meanwhile, a search band of men of valor. So men of valor, I think, is a term to use for like the soldiers of the Sons of Fire. So essentially, when the search band of the men of valor found the children, the children, as you could imagine, once they saw their own people, they ran to join the men of valor. But what happened was that the men of valor of the Sons of Fire believed that, these wild men had stolen these children. So they had slew them, like they killed them, thinking they had taken their children. But since then, we have seen their ways. So like this is quite fascinating where essentially it shows that the wild men, and that's, again, I don't know, this is like over 12,000 years ago, possibly. So essentially the wild men had taken care of the children, but then they got killed. But since then, the Sons of Fire learned how these primitive humans were. Because, that's the thing, like different groups of primitive humans would have, acted differently. So essentially this infers that they notice, actually, like the men of these wild people are actually quite nice to children. They're not seeking to harm them or anything like that. So, and here too, in terms of, you could see how the Sons of Fire had gone to the Eastern Quarter to build things where essentially, they have, so yeah, again, like I said, there's a lot in these passages that we can extract in terms of like from a historical perspective. So here when it says 110 of the wild people we have as bondsmen and bondswomen, it shows that some of the wild people actually joined them. Somehow they were able to communicate, maybe through like hand gestures and things like that. And the wild people, or at least some of them, were willing to work with the Sons of Fire, which I think would make sense, right? Like if primitive humans saw humans who had like these great ships and advanced tools, they would have been fascinated, and it seems like they were open to working with them. And yeah, in addition here, where it says the wall I caused to be built out into the water, and it encloses a pier to the bank where ships can moor. So that's the thing, like they clearly had knowledge about, they wanted to set up a port essentially where the ships can go, and with the wall, it would have prevented waves from crashing and hitting the waves. Like a lot of marinas and stuff like that do a similar thing today. So yeah, no, I find these passages quite fascinating. So now the passages continue here. It says, within the wall and circle of water, I have built the temple, but not all go in there with me. We are not one people. The gates of the temple are on pillars of wood and turn on a stone. And wooden are the pillars within. Great beams support the roof, and the walls are of wood and mud bricks. The floor is of sand finely raked, and before the altar rests on stones. There are no images designed to confuse men, For though the temple is poor, it does not enshrine ignorance. We have no evil men with us. There are men of valor and men of skill, men of the land and men of the sea, no more. So again, these are terms where men of valor are soldiers, men of skill are craftsmen who help build things. Men of the land, I would imagine, are more those who would try to do like agriculture or tend to the animals. And then men of the sea. So it continues here at passage 13. It says, beneath the altar is the grave of life, kept dry with mortar. It is in its place is the great chest of mysteries, and in the urns of life are the records. Well kept they are, and safe from the unlearned, all the records of the eastern quarter. So, anyways, we'll have more discussions about like ancient civilizations in later videos, but if this is truly the first time that the advanced humans went to the eastern quarter, where as we read here, the other humans were more primitive humans, and the Sons of Fire aimed to establish a city to help create a community with the wild men so that they would grow and learn and essentially evolve and things like that. So for all we know, this reference here to all the records of the Eastern Quarter, this could have been the foundational seeds that led to Eastern religions like, Hindu and, eventually Buddhism and things like that. So again, this is why I find it absolutely fascinating where if the texts within the Kolbrin are authentic, like it genuinely could be the most important manuscript in our human history, both from a historical perspective, but more importantly, as we'll talk later about, Moses, Jesus, and God and heaven and all that. Like this Kolbrin, that's the thing. It astounds me that the situation that we're in today, where I feel so strange being the only one here, where I'm like, do people not realize what's in this book? Like, oh my gosh. So, anyways, that's that. So, anyways, we'll continue here. So passage 14 here says, thus all things have been done according to your divining, and it is good. Okay, so passage 15 indicates how some parts of the records are lost, but then following this, passages 16 and 17 show that things go bad for Lothan and his crew. Very bad. So here, passage 15, which is in brackets, says, between that just copied and that which follows, there was a full plate, but the writing upon it was ineffective. So as I've spoken or mentioned in the previous videos, and I've shown with passages, it becomes quite clear that, if these really do date back to over 12,000 years ago, all of the writings were rewritten. And it really does seem as though throughout our human history, there were times when people would find these writings and they would rewrite them or transcribe them. And that's the thing. Notes like this, I think, really help to illustrate, or at least it makes it seem plausible that that's what happened, where, these were all ancient writings, and sometimes they would find either manuscript or here it says it was, a full plate, whether it was stone or things like that, where unfortunately when they received them, they couldn't make what was written on them, which is unfortunate, right? Like some of what was written is lost, unfortunately. But yeah, so here passage 16 says, in the land at the edge of the earth, there is little sun, and the people grow sick with water. The dampness causes a sickness among us, where the teeth become loose in the gums, and skin peels. Flesh puffs up and holds the marks of fingers. The people of the land beset us, and we cannot find them among the trees. Lothan was slain, with 12 men of valor, 3 days' journey inland among the trees. He died in the night. 2 men were caught by the wild men, who burnt them in cages. So that's the thing. It's it really, there's a reason why they called it the Harbor of Sorrow. It really shows how they had a tough time. But that's the thing. I find this passage, at least 16 here, it's quite fascinating because, today we have all of our medical knowledge, but back then they didn't. So that's the thing, here it's talking, the dampness causes a sickness among us where the teeth become loose in the gums and skin peels. So they're describing what they were experiencing, but they didn't quite know why. And so that's the thing. Ultimately, it shows that when they arrived in this place in the Eastern Quarter, the climate was quite different than what they were used to, so they really did struggle with that. And yeah, that's the thing. As we could tell, it's Lothan was slain, and then two men were caught and burnt in cages. So I mean, that's the thing. Like, this is like, for us reading this today, it's fascinating. Like, for the Sons of Fire back then, this was gruesome. They had a good intent where they wanted to establish a city and try to set these very primitive human beings on the road to progress. But yeah, so, and there's other passages that kind of describe similar things. So but yeah, it's just I find these like these chapters are a little bit difficult sometimes to read and to decipher, but when you take the time to really study it, it's like, oh my gosh, like it was quite the dreadful experience. So thankfully Hoskaya comes with men and ships from the land of the Sons of Fire. Now it's a bit difficult to tell from these passages within like this chapter whether Hoskaya himself came or if it was men from Hoskaya's people who came. However, in later chapters, it speaks of how the Sons of Fire came with Hoskaya and saved them at the Harbor of Sorrow. So those were the passages we went through at the beginning. So now we'll go through passages 18 to 21, which further explain just how bad things had gone for those with the Sons of Fire. So it says, "Men have come in ships from the land of the Sons of Fire, who are our brothers. Alman the scribe and Korah the builder came. Hoskaya, who is a man mighty in battle, having gone from us, brought them here by Kadmis. Of the Sons of Fire there are 400, but few are fighting men. They are not men of valor. They are men of the sea and cultivators and men who trade. There are builders among them and men skilled in the ways of wood and stone, for they came to establish a city in this place. This, the kingdom of the trees, is no place for a city. Trees shut us in and hold us captive. They conceal those who lie in wait to do us harm. A house is built, and trees take over the roof, and plants creep over the walls. Corn is planted and rots, while weeds smother other growing food. Grayness is everywhere, even the face of the sun is pale here. Men shiver without heat, and the air is not pure and mixed with water. Wild dogs lurk among the trees, to tear the unwary to pieces. There are a few stones, and they are covered with slime. The wild fruits and herbs are poisonous, and men have died eating them. The wild men in this place eat their own children, and anoint their bodies with the fat of the dead. There is a race of men with great hairy bodies and the heads of dogs, who carry children off to feast on them. Arutha, wife of Amora, died in the embrace of one. They have hides that no arrow can pierce." So, I mean, it's quite dreadful, but, we can't place blame on the wild human beings because they were, like, actually a Stone Age tribe who just didn't know better. But that's the thing. This really maybe gives some insight into, how ancient tribes of humans were. I mean, it is what it is back in the Stone Age. But it also shows the importance because that's the thing, as we read in the previous video and as we'll continue reading in the next video, that's why Osiris and the Sons of Fire were essential into where it really does seem that they were the ones who helped create the catalyst that helped humanity reach the Neolithic age, which once humanity reached the Neolithic age with knowledge of agriculture and had some sort of wisdom and knew that a little bit better how they should live, especially when they were taught at least part of the light of truth in terms of, God, heaven, and how we should live. That's the thing. It really does seem as though humanity today would not be where it was if not for Osiris and the Sons of Fire. So from passages 22 and 23, it seems as though ultimately it was, mission accomplished, and the people of the Sons of Fire eventually sailed back towards the west. So here it says, "The book of heaven is open to the Sons of Fire. In it, they found the road across the waters. They are filled with the wisdom of wanderers. As we came by the sea in the hands of seafarers, so shall we go out. We long for the welcome omens of the shining arrows of the night. Our people are wary, and there is muttering among the men of valor, for they fear the spirit of the trees. His breath surrounds us. His gray fingernails corrupt our possessions. He has caused our cattle to die and our crops to wither. Against him we are powerless. He was robbed of this land hewn out from among the trees. He will never forget. So, again, despite the Sons of Fire being the more advanced humans, as we'll see as we keep reading through the text of the Kolbrin, despite them being more advanced, they too maybe had some spiritual beliefs due to their, they were trying to come up with reasonings and explanations for things without the scientific knowledge that we have today. So that's the thing. Even the men of valor, they feared what they call here the spirit of the trees, where it, because of just how difficult things were and the climate and how things just went bad. It's for them. They attribute it to maybe like some sort of dark spirit of the area. And then passage 23 continues here. The great secrets and sacred wisdom are secured for our children. We place them and ourselves in the hands of the Sons of Fire. We shall leave this place and sail towards Hiran, towards the west, where lies the land of white stone. There we may build with stone and brick. So it seems like, at least some of them, after establishing the city and feeling confident that they've done enough to, establish the seeds with the people that in hopes for them to grow, it seems like they were quite happy to leave afterwards. So then passages 24 to 29 summarize the people and things that were lost during their time in the Eastern Quarter. So ultimately reading through these, it helps to illustrate the items, food, and animals that they had with them. So here it says, here is the tally of our departure. Of those who came with Lothan, 90 men of valor and the households of 35. There are 70 men of valor who came later, and those of the Sons of Fire. 82 men of skill and 8 households newly formed. There are the men of valor who came with Hoskaya, and the households among them. There are 9 households which came later. There are 240 bondsmen. Of these, 110 carry slings and clubs. Some have fighting axes of stone and staves shod with metal, but there is no sharpened weapon among them. 104 among all the households are children of unmarried women, for many have died of the sickness belonging to this place. There are slaves, but most have died or perished among the trees. The cattle are gone, and there are a few sheep and goats. There are, for each man of valor, 2 measures of corn at morning, and for others 1 measure. Of corn, there are 60 great baskets. Of herbs, dried by fire, 45 akrim. There is fish fried by fire and some meat. There are 110 baskets of cupped nuts, which are bitter and go sour. The men of the trees eat them, and for such people it is proper food. There are Nara nuts, which grow in this place, sweet but not stomach-filling, and nuts which are good for cakes in quantities. There is much weapon metal melted down, and gold and silver in pieces. There are all kinds of tools for the men of skill, and much pottery in the households. But much has gone to the men of the trees. And of cloth there is little, and men are clothed in skins and the woven fiber of plants. And then passage 30 ends the chapter with a bit of a departure note. It says, the harbor of sorrow we leave behind, and with 4 ships sail towards the sunsetting. 1 ship goes to the land of the Sons of Fire. Spirit of Lothan, remain among us as we go far away among men who are strangers to us. Okay, so now we're going to move to chapter 12 of the Book of Sons of Fire, which is the Rolls of Record 6. Now, before going through the passages, I just want to give a little bit of context. So, in videos 7 to 9, we'll go over chapters that are related to Moses and ancient Egypt. And after studying all of these texts within the Kolbrin, it really does seem as though the people with Moses incorporated elements of the very ancient writings into their story. So, for example, as we've been discussing in these videos, where the biblical flood may have happened, during Osiris's generation, which could have been over 12,000 years ago. And, part of what Moses did is, by writing the stories in the book of Genesis, he took elements of these sacred writings and tried to essentially repurpose them for the people at the time, for the Israelites. So in this chapter, it describes in detail the story, or perhaps the historical record, of the fight that we know today as David versus Goliath. So that's the thing, in terms of, because we have a little bit more certainty on our history around the time of, 3,000 years ago with ancient Egypt and Moses and all that, the story of David Goliath versus Goliath seems more as a story, because I think, there's less of a record of there being giants at that time. However, in these chapters, which is talking about Osiris's generation, which would have been over 12,000 years ago, there are passages, like we'll discuss it more, I think, in a later video, but there are passages here and there which do make references to certain lands where there were giants, but also like lands where there's little people and things like that. So that's the thing. We'll read through this chapter here where it mentions a giant, and who knows? Like, that's the thing. I guess this is kind of out of my expertise. Like, I'm not an expert on things like that, but for all we know, there may have actually been giants 12,000 years ago. And again, like we'll see, I think it refers to the giant as being 9 feet tall. So like not a huge giant, but I mean, still 9 feet tall would, even for us today, would be considered a bit of a giant. Now, it's not quite certain where exactly the events of this chapter occurred, because it doesn't mention Hoskaya or Lothan. But it's likely in the Eastern Quarter, because it seems like a lot of the rolls of record are in the Eastern Quarter. So the first 11 passages of this chapter speak of the Sons of Fire journeying and encountering some barbarians with strange ways. So we won't read through those passages in this video, but if you'd like, you could go read it, either if you have a copy of the Kolbrin, it's, like I said, it's chapter 12 of the Book of Sons of Fire, or you can read about it in Appendix D12 of the report that I put together that's linked in the description. Okay, so after those first 11 passages, we meet a character called Corin. Now, overall, the story of Corin might not be important in the grand scheme of things, but it does include some interesting events. It turns out that Corin was quite the warrior, and people aptly named him the Cunning One. So one day, Corin and the fighting men went out into the forest to hunt, and the king of that place sent men to take them. But Corin refused to go, and there was a loud dispute. And as we'll read in the passages, the situation became violent. But as we'll read in these passages, we immediately see why Corin was well known for his capabilities. Here we'll start with passage 12 here. It says, "We went out through the mouth of the sea into the sea of the great river, past the lands of white copper to the place of painted men, where we drew up the ships and stacked them. Among the fighting men were some from Sparcia, whose leader was Corin, called the Axeman, but whom we named the Cunning One. These went out into the forest to hunt, and the king of that place sent men to take them, but they refused to go, and there was a loud dispute. The bodyguard with the leader of the painted men were bowmen, and one shot an arrow at Corin. He slewed aside behind his shield, and the arrow turned into the throat of a painted man who held a sword against him." So essentially what this is describing is that Corin was captured by these painted men, who I would imagine is kind of a more primitive tribe of human beings. So essentially one of the painted men was holding Corin with a sword by his throat. And then one of the other ones went to shoot an arrow at Corin, but essentially it describes how Corin moved behind his shield and deflected it, so the arrow hit the shield and then turned into the throat of the painted man who was like holding a sword to his throat. So yeah, that helps to show his capabilities there. Whether this is a story or a real, I don't know. But like I said, it's an interesting chapter. But yeah, so it continues here. It says, "This started a great fight between forest and sea, and though surrounded by many enemies, Kolbrin fought through them. The battle was his because he went forward through the forest and attacked the houses of the painted men." So again, it kind of helps to show what kind of character Kolbrin was, where instead of retreating, he moved forward and went on the offensive. So as we'll read in the next passages, we see how the ships were divided, and those with Kolbrin sailed to a place called the Harbor of Giants. Now, as we read through this, it could be perhaps argued that Kolbrin and the Sons of Fire were the aggressors here. But at the same time, it appears that the wife of one of the Sons of Fire, called Albanic, was being held captive. So here it says, "The ships were divided, and those who wished to set up the eagle and serpent went to the harbor of giants in Belharia. The same giants are builders of great temples, and they are 6 cubits tall." And I believe 6 cubits would be around 9 feet tall. So then passage 16 here says, "The ship with Kolbrin stayed with us, and he hunted them out of their caves and slew them all, save one giantess. She came to us bound as a surety for the life of the wife of Albanic." So this is a female giant. So overall, it seems like there's only one giant left who's a giantess. And as we'll read here, Kolbrin and his crew made their way to the local king with the captured giantess, perhaps in hopes of retrieving Albanic's wife. But as fate would have it, things did not go well. So as we'll read here, this led to a showdown between Kolbrin and the giantess. So it says, "We came to a bay on one side of which was a forest, and on the other a plain where herds grazed. For the men of that place it was the time of the feast of fires, and they held games upon the shore and ran races in cleared land behind. At this time they would not fight, so we met them in peace. They wore garments woven in 2 parts and belted with hide. They had caps of skin or leather, and the tunic which hung about them was darkly colored in blue, green, and brown. They enclosed their legs and feet in dressed skins, bound in front with thongs. They had many ornaments of copper, but little gold or silver, though their armbands and brooches shone like silver. They had the art of making copper like silver or gold. These people hold a great feast before the beginning of the heat, when their god Mago appears. Inside the god were the spirits of men whom the god had eaten, and their voices could be heard calling for deliverance from darkness. Because of the feast, these people demanded the giantess, and she was given over to them for the days of feasting. We did not know the ways of these people, and when we saw that they wished us to drink blood, we drew apart from them. The headman sent a messenger to us, and Kolbrin and the giantess wrestled together. But the giantess was the stronger, so Kolbrin lured her towards the cliff edge. Kolbrin taunted her and laughed at her clumsiness. And then at the break of the cliff, he tricked her so that she rushed forward. As she passed beside him, he turned behind her and pushed so that she fell over the cliff onto a large black rock below. Her back was broken. The same black rock was later split and taken up to be worshipped. So it's essentially here, I mean, there's a few things here. So again, like it must have been quite the situation where, the Sons of Fire were trying to intermingle or, communicate and participate with the more tribal people. But like it says here, we did not know the ways of these people. And when we saw that they wished us to drink blood, we drew apart from them. So it seems that due to their reluctance during this feast or that the people were having, overall, then it turned into a situation where Kolbrin and the giantess were fighting. But, as it notes, the giant was much stronger than Kolbrin. So Kolbrin used his agility and his intelligence, I guess, to to essentially trick the giantess. So she ran towards a cliff, he moved, and then he pushed her over the cliff, and she fell and broke her back on a large stone. So yeah, and I guess that's the thing, like it's hard to tell whether the people were maybe fearful of the giants, so that it seems like they celebrated the black rock that the giant's back was broken upon. But anyways, yeah, so this is very clearly kind of a David versus Goliath battle here. So the chapter ends with passages 20 to 22, which speak of how there were weaklings with them who did not help, but they took part of the treasure. So as we see in the last passages, Corin chased after them, never to return. So it says here, in the place to which we came, the deathless stars ride high. The adze rests on the morning, and the watchman at the gate of the sky sits at the eastern tiller in the evening. The falcon is rarely seen clearly. This is the land of Dada. We warned them, but they would not listen. They were fasting before the battle, the sacred fast before they ate the meat of the offerings. We buried salt beneath the floors of their houses so that no man would live there again. When the horns sounded the alarm and danger threatened, these shrewd bargainers came running to us. Their faces were wet with the sweat of fear, and their lips trembled. When the danger was past, they came out with chests puffed up and tongues bragging about their deeds. They were the first to push forward for a share in the plunder. So essentially, it seems to be describing that there were some weaklings, as they call them, who kind of stayed back in fear. But once the people won and there was like some sort of treasure to plunder, they were the first to push forward for a share in the plunder. So this is the last passage of the chapter, which says, Corin left to seek them. He took 2 ships, but did not return to his children. The leader may be carried away, but the lowliest of those who followed him has a will, which need never be broken. Now, when men wish to say something is impossible, they say, where's Corin? So, like I said, this ultimately this chapter isn't necessarily like the most important in terms of the grand scheme of things, in terms of like Osiris, the flood, and all that. But that's the thing, it seems to be accepted that there would not be an actual giant during the time of the Israelites after Moses. So it really could be that this story from over 12,000 years ago is what was taken as an inspiration when the texts in the book of Genesis were written with the David versus Goliath story. So like I said at the beginning, there are other chapters that indicate that there may have actually been giants back then in terms of 12,000 years ago. So yeah, this is a passage from the book of manuscripts, which says, northward is the home of the cool breeze, but beyond the lands which skirt the salt waters are the one-eyed peoples, and the giants with white hair and eyes. Here, the rocks and stones are of the whitest marble, and the trees bear white fruit. Thus, in the whiteness, the eyes of men are blinded in their youth, for even the grass grows white. So, again, like I'm not an expert in any of this, whether this is feasible biologically or not. So, but, I'm quite interested to see what, my hope is that either through the report I wrote or these videos or somehow, maybe even you watching this video, maybe you'll help to bring awareness to these texts. And I'm quite interested because that's the thing, like, I don't know, is it possible that there may have been humans who were one-eyed peoples? Like this might have influenced the later stories of, a cyclops. And here, giants with white hair and eyes, where it seems like maybe because of the area, the eyes of men are blinded in their youth, and maybe that's why their eyes kind of had that tint of white. So again, I don't know, maybe this is a story, or maybe when people inherited these texts, maybe it was a story, but then when they were rewritten, the people may have thought it was real. So the way it's written might make it seem as though it's real. Again, I don't know. But anyways, I figured like this chapter is maybe a little bit of a detour, in terms of talking about Osiris and all that stuff. But anyways, I found it quite interesting. Okay, so now we're going to read through chapter 11 of the Book of Sons of Fire, which is the Rolls of Record 5. And this chapter speaks more about Hoskaya and the Sons of Fire. So this chapter from the Rolls of Record has two sets of passages. So the passage 1 to 7 are from someone who is praying to God, and it's speaking about some of the dynamics of our soul. So it's quite fascinating. And so that's the thing with reading passage 8, which we'll read below here. Essentially, it's a note by the scribes which speak of the first 7 passages, where it seems as though these passages were technically not meant to be recorded. However, they believed it was worth writing them down for the benefit of everyone, since they are likely words spoken by Hoskaya, who again represents Osiris, who's one of the greatest prophets to have ever lived on earth. Because, passage 8 here says, "This was not written for the eyes of men, but will he who wrote it object if by being recorded for men, it adds even a mite to the storehouse of goodness available to men on earth?" So here we'll read through the first 7 passages, which again, it's essentially like a personal prayer by who seems to be Hoskaya. So it says here, "Supreme One above greatness, illuminate the hearts of my people and let them see the path ahead. Permit them to understand the meaning of life. Make their hearts fearful for the responsibility they carry with regard to the future state of their souls. To this end, help them towards achieving a humble spirit and a kindly heart. Grant them some glimpse of eternity while here on earth, so that they may better understand what lies before them. Bestow upon them the ability to make contact with the fount of wisdom and truth, and let them draw near the well of holiness to sip its waters. Help them to make right judgments and guide their hearts so they hold fast to the teachings of our masters who have gone before. Make them steadfast in the light and show them the falsity that glitters in the darkness. When they come to their end of their journey, Supreme One above greatness, grant them immortality in the region of eternal light. Incline them towards them in mercy, for you can even mitigate the impress of wickedness upon their everlasting souls." So essentially, this is a prayer to God where, it's quite clear that this is why I think it's Hoskaya, because he's talking about, for his people. Essentially, it's helping us he's praying so that God helps the people learn about the spiritual knowledge so that it could grant them immortality in the region of eternal light, which is heaven. So we'll continue with passage 2 here, which is a continuation of the prayer. It says, "Our masters taught that the soul of man is the seed of a spirit implanted within the body of a beast. Supreme One above greatness, send down the refreshing waters of your wisdom and compassion upon my people, that the seed may be nourished within them to spring to life in the land of light. If the seed wither within the body or be consumed by the beast, we are condemned to the doom of everlasting nothingness. Let none of my people suffer this, for even the most wicked among them will be missed by others in the region of eternal light. Supreme One above greatness, who reads the hearts of men as an unrolled book, what can I ask for myself? I, who, though first in rank among my people, fall far below many of them in strength of a soul. I am a man of battles and not a man of prayer. Therefore, I cannot know how I stand with you." So again, some of the things I underlined is, and I spoke a little bit about this in video 1 about the introduction. It helps to understand, kind of what's known as the fabled mark of the beast in terms of, it's not meant to be some sort of like the Antichrist or some, 4 horsemen kind of thing. It's, later when we'll read passages about Jesus, but also here in the much older writings from Osiris, it really does seem as though the intent is to say that, us human beings on earth, we're part eternal soul, part animal. So the idea is that life is a test. We're supposed to grow in divinity to become more spiritual, as opposed to succumbing to our carnal desires and becoming a beast. And I underlined here, I am a man of battles and not a man of prayer, which again, it really seems like this is Osiris or Hoskaya because he was, like we read in the previous video, he was a great warrior. And I really like this part of the passage here in the middle where it says, "Let none of my people suffer this, for even the most wicked among them will be missed by others in the region of eternal light." So it really shows, how genuinely good Osiris was, where he genuinely hopes that everyone, like every single human being, can grow and become worthy of life in heaven. And it continues here. "Indeed, Supreme One above greatness, I have brought about much sorrow and suffering in my days. The burden of my manhood has weighed down heavily upon me. But Supreme One above greatness, I have never robbed the widow or fatherless, or struck at the helpless and those without protection. I have not mocked the afflicted or stood aside in fear when wickedness was being done. I have slain no man, unless he has been my enemy and would have slain me. When I served any man, I served him well. I have never deserted a friend in distress or violated the sanctity of another man's home. Yet, Supreme One above greatness, I have done much that men condemn and therefore cannot know my standing before you. Yet, however I stand in your eyes, do not consider me too unworthy to plead for my people. I was not born among those who are now my people. I am not of their blood. And once I called upon the God of my fathers after the manner of my fathers. Yet, are you not the same being, by whatever name called? You are the being before whom my spirit bows, the sustainer of its strength. You alone know the conflict which has twisted my heart in its resting place, for I cannot know what indeed is truth. I do not expect to know, being unworthy of such knowledge. I did not desert you, but sought only to see you more clearly and serve you better. When I could not understand you in one place, I sought you in another. I looked for you where there was more light. Amid the people of my youth, you seemed close, yet I could not understand you, for they wished to enclose you in a box. Now, though you appear further away, I see more clearly and know your nature." So like I underlined here, I was not born among those who are now my people. This could be, again, it kind of fits the stories of especially Herthu, but also as Hoskaya that we read in the previous chapter where, after the flood, he established himself among more primitive tribes and united them to be peaceful. And, I also find this is maybe a interesting reference here where it says, "Amid the people of my youth, you seemed close, yet I could not understand you, for they wished to enclose you in a box." Again, like we discussed before, like the people that Osiris was from before the flood, like he wasn't of the same people of Thoth, like he wasn't, so he grew up before the flood with people who only knew truth in part. And it continues here. "Supreme One above greatness, I cannot say, as others do, that I have no doubts, for indeed I am often torn with conflicting thoughts. I do not doubt your existence, for I have been granted a manifestation of its reality. But I am full of doubts about my relationship with you. Then, too, there is so much I cannot understand. Yet others turn to me for guidance. When I make an error affecting only myself, I do not complain about the consequences. But should I guide others into error, my heart will be torn apart. God of my people and Father of my soul, incline towards me a little, for of myself I cannot reach you. Enlighten me so that I may lead others into the light. Death and destruction I do not fear, not even everlasting nothingness, but I do fear being inadequate for my task. Supreme One above greatness, give me confidence and strength. I ask no more. If I cannot find these things with you, I can find them nowhere. Guide me, Supreme One above greatness. What shall I do for my people?" So as underlined here where it says, I do not doubt your existence, where like your uppercase here means God, for I have been granted a manifestation of its reality. So we'll talk about the what's known as the twice-born ritual in video 14. But that's the thing, it's clear that Osiris was a prophet, so he would have accomplished a twice-born ritual where they do experience a manifestation of the spiritual side. So that's why he says, I do not doubt your existence, for I have been granted a manifestation of its reality. And again, in terms of his character, I really like these passages down here where it says, when I make an error affecting only myself, I do not complain about the consequences, but should I guide others into error, my heart will be torn apart. So it really shows how, if he makes a mistake himself, he's not too egotistical where he doesn't complain about the consequences. He takes personal responsibility. But since he recognizes that a lot of people rely on him, he says, but should I guide others into error, my heart will be torn apart, where he genuinely feels bad if he, ends up accidentally leading people in the wrong direction. Okay, so now we'll move to the second part of the chapter where passages 9 and 10 include information that could help us understand where people from the Sons of Fire came from. So as we'll read through the passages, it seems as though Hoskaya may have requested for members of the Children of Light to come to the city. They might not have come until what may have been like decades after Hoskaya had died. And these passages could be referring to the city established in the Eastern Quarter. Because again, from what we read before, first Lothan went to the Eastern Quarter, but they had difficulty. So then Hoskaya came with other members of the Sons of Fire to help them. So that's the thing. That's why I think that this city could be in the Eastern Quarter, where the Children of Light and the Sons of Fire would have been somewhere else, which I think would have been like in the north. So here, passage 9 reads, when Hoskaya was past 80 years of age, he sent to Pelassi for the remnants of the Children of Light. None of them came, for they said it was not meet for them to journey to the edge of the earth to dwell among barbarians. They said, we will retain the light here, for out there it will surely be extinguished. So it seems as though Hoskaya had requested for some of the Children of Light who may have been like some of the advanced humans and potentially priests who had survived the biblical flood. Like they may have been priests of the Holy Mountain before the flood. But it seems like they were cautious and thought that their time was better spent in the land of the Sons of Fire to help maintain the light. And continues here, passage 10, it says, later, 4 ships did come, but they carried the standards of Ashratim. With them came Enos Husadim of the sons of Dan, a learned man from the slopes of the mountain, which rests in darkness and reaches up to the limits of light. He knew Hoskaya when a child. There came also one named Zodak, who had dwelt in Tualis, and he brought with him all the books of the Children of Light. With Zodak came many men who knew the mysteries of metal, and they brought with them the light of Amos. When they came, the spirit of Hoskaya had already joined his father. So that's the thing, this passage here where it says the spirit of Hoskaya had already joined his fathers, it seems to allude that, later when 4 ships did come, Hoskaya had already died. So it's hard to tell, but it seems as though Osiris, for all we know, may have died in the Eastern Quarter. So again, it's not important like where people are buried and stuff like that. But even though Osiris was known as one of the greater gods in ancient Egypt, again, this was over 12,000 years ago, and maybe he lived his last days in the Eastern Quarter. And yeah, that's the thing. So here with the underline where it says that these priests who came knew Hoskaya when a child. So that's the thing, right? Like Hoskaya, when he was a child, that's a reference to before the flood, because since Hoskaya would have captained one of the ships, he was, it seems like he was still quite young when he captained the ship, but he had entered manhood, versus here it refers to him when he was a child. And when here it says that they brought with them all the books of the Children of Light, that's the thing. They may have made copies of all the books that they had and brought it with them to the Eastern Quarter. And also underline here, the sons of Dan. Again, I don't know if this would have had an impact in some of the Genesis stories. So passages 11 to 19 are passages spoken by Hosea about the city before he died, which again, it really does seem like it's in the eastern quarter because it mentions Cladwiggan, and we'll read a chapter later in this video where it seems like Cladwiggan was one of the primitive humans who helped the Sons of Fire in the eastern quarter. Now, from these passages, we see that Hosea truly was a noble warrior, and we should be ever grateful that some of the essence of what he once wrote has survived for us. So that's the thing, just these passages I find absolutely fascinating because it's a personal message from one of the greatest human beings who has ever lived. And like I've been mentioning before, it really does seem as though humanity would not be what it is today had it not been for Osiris. Just from the description, like we read earlier about just the state of humanity at the time, which again, it was no one's fault. It was a very primitive time. And these people really worked hard to try and spread the wisdom and help establish these people that later became all these ancient civilizations who had developed all these, religious wisdom and things like that. So I will read through the passages here. It says, before his spirit took wings, Hosea wrote this for the guidance of his people. So these are personal words by Hosea. My trusted ones, the time draws near for my departure on the great voyage, and I cannot complete the tasks before my hands. In one thing I have been neglectful, for though the chief guardian of the records, the time I devoted to their care was little enough. Thank the priests for their care. I have recorded many statutes needful for this place. Their like was not known before, but were not set down for men to see. Now they are made known to the ears of every man. Your welfare and safety has ever been my first concern, but I am a man of battle and a commander of men, not a scribe and recorder. So here essentially he acknowledges that though he was the chief guardian of the records after learning from Thoth, he seems to, in his later days, maybe he regrets not having done more with the sacred writings. So he's thanking the priests, because again, it wasn't just Osiris, he had his people with him. So he's essentially thanking the priests who were with him for doing more work in terms of maintaining and possibly teaching from the sacred writings. And it continues here. My trusted ones, we are few, and the barbarians about us are many. For a while they are well kept in hand, for Cladwiggan wishes us well, and his sons are our friends. We have toiled to raise a city, and men come and go freely among us. Many ships come in their season. Yet, stout warriors who are not friendly press down from the northeast, and therefore vigilance must never be relaxed. We cannot sleep peacefully side by side with the barbarians and must ever be alert. Danger hangs over us like a boulder upon the mountainside, and our safety is like the playstone in the hands of a child. The barbarians do not forget that we are strangers in this land, and only while we serve a purpose are we welcome. Yet, my trusted ones, with all the dangers around us, it is the dangers threatening within that I fear the most. We are few indeed against the numbers of barbarians, yet we weaken ourselves with foolish strife, one with the other, and people with people. Continues here. Our city is a place for buying and selling, a place where things are exchanged. Outside, it is a marketplace where men come and go as they please, and they buy and sell without hindrance. We have laws for the city and laws for the marketplace. Among us are many craftsmen who exchange the things they make with the barbarians, who bring things to eat. We have a good life here, but it is not a life I fully understand. We came from afar to set up a city dedicated to the light, to hold the light. Yet, is this such a city? Do men seek the light and worship it, or do they seek luxury and worship wealth and possessions? When some of us came from the harbor of sorrow, we were full of praise at our deliverance from death. But amid the forests of fruitfulness, much of our gratitude and will was lost. Why must men always be better men in the face of disaster and in the midst of privation than in the green fields of peace and plenty? Does this not answer the questions of many who ask why there is sorrow and suffering on earth? Why is it the lot of men to struggle and suffer if not to make better men? So essentially here it's describing how, they established a city and the intent of the city was to hold the light of the truth. Because that's the thing, despite them also bringing material wisdom, the main thing they were, and that's the thing, that's the spiritual truth of our life on earth, is that ultimately we must never forget that we're eternal souls, and the point of life is to live in a way to allow our souls to grow in a positive direction. So essentially here in this passage, he's saying that, once the city was built and that there was at least some level of peace, they're wondering like, oh, is this city really serving its purpose? Because it seems as though in a time of peace, the people are focused more on their material possessions as opposed to seeking spiritual wisdom. So, and yeah, that's the thing. We'll talk more about this in later videos about the meaning of life, but here where he says, like, why must men always be better men in the face of disaster and in the midst of privation than in the green fields of peace and plenty? Does this not answer the questions of many who ask why there is sorrow and suffering on earth? So, like, actually, I mean, for those who've watched the introduction video, I know it's quite long and it's 8 hours long, but when we were going through passages related to Jesus, and there was those passages where I think I included it near the very end of video 1, where it was essentially Jesus writing down what the Holy Spirit answered him when Jesus asked why there is sorrow and strife like on earth. And part of it is like Osiris essentially concludes here, where part of the reason why on earth there's pain and suffering is that there's something about overcoming pain and suffering that leads to spiritual growth. And again, spiritual growth is in essence the meaning of our life on earth here. So yeah, it continues here with passage 15, which again, these are still words from Hosea. It says, "My trusted ones, my eyes may be clouded to the things before them, but I am not blind to your ways. Already our women cast their eyes towards the barbarians. And when women seek men outside their own kind, it is a sign of people's degeneracy. I read what is written and I fear for the future. Many who are with us in the light will join us, and then we shall be stronger in arms and strengthened in belief." Although here there's an annotation where it says how few came. So maybe Hosea was a little bit too optimistic, and later they added that actually not as many people came. But then it continues here. "Yet our destiny lies among the barbarians. They are fine, upright men endowed with courage. Do not belittle their ways, but bring them into the light. Our city was not founded as a marketplace, a place for exchanging only the things of earth. Neither did we come here as conquerors, but as men seeking refuge. My trusted ones, remember that the road of life is not smooth, neither is the way of survival a path of grass. The most needful thing for any people who wish to survive is self-discipline. Think less of gold and more of the iron which protects the gold. Remember, too, these words from the book of Mithram. The keenest sword is useless unless it be held in the hand of a resolute man. Also, the man who has gold and keeps it in peace if he tends his bowstrings." And then this is the last passage of the chapter. It says, "The remainder of Hosea's words to the people has been lost." So again, I mean, it's quite unfortunate to think about this today where, there's notes like this where it shows that there is some parts of what was once written that has been lost. So, but at the same time, we are incredibly fortunate that there are, again, that's the thing. I know all the controversy with the Kolbrin, but like I've been saying, I really do think that these may be legitimate writings that survived in an ancient manuscript, which again was rewritten throughout our history. So while it's sad that, some of Hosea's words has been lost, we're quite fortunate that some of his words have been maintained for us to read today. Okay, so now we're going to move to another chapter. We're going to read through chapter 3 of the Book of Sons of Fire. That's called the Brotherhood. So this chapter, as expected from the title, is about the Brotherhood, but more specifically about the Brotherhood of the Sons of Fire. So we're not like, it's not quite sure when, like what generation of people wrote this. It's likely in between Osiris's generation and those in ancient Egypt, which is a pretty long stretch of, thousands of years. But essentially it's meant to help discuss or describe the ways of the Brotherhood of the Sons of Fire, who, again, like they operated like a bit of a secret society. So here passage 1 says, brothers in belief, there are two roads through life, the road of good and the road of evil. They are not clearly defined roads and often run side by side and sometimes cross each other. Those who travel without a guide or in darkness often mistake one road for the other. We are those who have chosen to walk in light, a brotherhood of men who travel the road of good together in companionship. So passages 2 and 3 speak of two types of companions within the brotherhood. So here it reads, we are companions of the great path of the true way. And when an instructing brother speaks of the great path of the true way, he speaks of a double path. The companions of the right hand are those who bear the burdens of earthly labor and advancement, for they require strength, dexterity, and steadiness. The companions of the left hand are those who bear the burdens of spiritual labor and enlightenment, things closer to the heart of man. The brotherhood is separated into two parts. There is an earthly brotherhood, and though it may be small in numbers and have few possessions, this will not always be so. There is also a heavenly brotherhood, comprising certain of the twice-born and their followers who have gone before. Their task is to clear the netherworld of demons and dark spirits, and to prepare the way for those who follow. They are like men who enter a new country and must clear it of wild beasts and bring the land under control. It is the task of those above and those below to build a road joining the two territories. So essentially there are those who were deemed better suited to become masters of tasks related to earthly labor. So that's the earthly brotherhood. And then there's those who became priests and twice-born prophets of the heavenly brotherhood. And here where it says, it is the task of those above and those below to build a road joining the two territories, like it is talking about earth and heaven. And so, yeah, it's quite fascinating. So passages 4 to 8 speak of the initial steps or goals of the brotherhood, as well as some of their claims about their proposed path to understanding the truth. And it also speaks a little bit about meditation. So it reads here, your brother is not well equipped to instruct in earthly matters, and therefore leaves it to another. The caravan moves quicker when each man rides his own camel. In spiritual matters, the most important is that each man should awaken his own soul, a task far more difficult than it may appear, but for which earth is the dedicated instrument. The first objective to attain towards this end is self-taming. Just as a horse has to be broken in before it can be of any service, so has the mortal body of man to be tamed and brought under control. To do this requires not only self-discipline, but also the ability to rise above earthly conditions. No easy task, for earth is a hard taskmaster and a worthy adversary, and the mortal body of man an unruly steed. So here, essentially, it's talking about how self-discipline and gaining control over our, again, this is kind of where everything, it all kind of comes together with, humans can either become more spiritual or descend by falling to their carnal desires and becoming beasts. So that's why it says that, the first objective to attain towards awakening our soul is self-taming, where we need to be disciplined and overcome our carnal desires. So it continues here with passage 6. The duties, the obligations, and the restraints by which those who follow the great path of the true way direct their steps are not imposed capriciously. They are, in fact, no more than the bare essentials covering the first steps. That is why everyone, before admittance to the Brotherhood, must accept every obligation and decree covering our way of life. We do not claim to know the only path. Undoubtedly, there are others, but we can claim to know the best. The top of the mountain may be reached by many paths, but the shortest one is always the hardest. Supreme personal spiritual experience is undoubtedly the best source for the foundation of true spiritual faith. It begins with the development of latent spiritual powers through meditation. When you are ready, seek out a place of solitude, a place that is away from the abodes of men, a place that is restful and quiet. Take a skin and a little food and water, just sufficient for your needs. Now turn your thoughts inwards, harmonizing them with the rhythm of the body. Let your spirit seek harmony with the spirit flowing about it, so that the two become one. While at your meditations, neither overeat nor undereat, for there must be harmony in your eating and sleeping, in your relaxation and activity. To become one who knows the joys of spiritual self-consciousness, to have a truth-revealing vision transcending anything knowable by the senses, to rise above the bondage of pain and sorrow, and to free the spirit from the shackles of the body at will, is something unattainable by spiritual meditation alone. Leading to this road is the path of moral self-discipline and courage. The creed that teaches spiritual things alone is as barren as one concerned with only with earthly things. So two things that I underlined here is that, so again, we'll read more about the twice-born ritual, which speaks more about like the maybe getting like a vision or like an out-of-body experience. But this is what's referring here, to have a truth-revealing vision transcending anything knowable by the senses. I guess the idea is that, again, I mean, I'm not a prophet, I don't know these things, but with reading the passages that we will in the chapters about the twice-born ritual, that's the thing. I guess what it's inferring is that for those who get a spiritual vision, then it becomes more apparent that like, oh, there is more to life than meets the eye, because they have an experience where they see things that are not of this world, essentially. But what's really important here as well in the second part that I underlined, and we'll talk, like this applies to even just like the meaning of life and all that stuff, is that, sometimes there's people who maybe just focus too much on spiritual things, but they say that the creed that teaches spiritual things alone is as barren as one concerned only with earthly things. Like that's the thing, is that it's to really ascend into the way that these prophets did, is that you need to focus both on the spiritual, but also gain like self-control over your body and your carnal desires. And it's also, I think, in part where, you have to do through actions, through deeds, and through labor. Actually, that's when we read the passages from Jesus in later videos, like he really makes a point that labor is quite important. So passage 9 notes that the teachings must remain within a higher circle, and then passage 10 closes the chapter with a prayer. So here, passage 9 says, "Your brother will not set forth in writing all things concerning the awakening of the spirit. They would be of no use until the moral foundation is laid. Such teachings must remain within the higher circle of those who travel the right-hand path, and not disclosed to the uninitiated." So essentially it's kind of inferring, again, this was a secret society, and as we discussed before, like they purposely kept the higher knowledge of the spiritual hidden from the common people. And then passage 10 here, which closes this chapter, says, "Let the prayer upon your admission be always fresh in your memories. Great Supreme Creator, craftsman of earth and of the multiple spheres, grant that our brother may always remain loyal, that he will, day by day, become ever more worthy and so dedicated to devote his life to the service of mankind and the completion of its purpose, that he shall forever walk in the light of truth. And again, here it talks about like God, the craftsman of earth and of the multiple spheres. So again, like I said, we'll talk more about that's the thing. They define, our existence as, there's multiple spheres. There's the physical sphere, which is like here on earth and in this physical universe. And then there's the sphere of heaven, which is the spiritual side. Oh, and the last passage continues here. It's a bit of a longer passage. So this is, again, the continuation of the prayer. It says, grant him the crown of wisdom, the garments of knowledge, and let him be shod with diligence. Grant him the strength to abide by our instruction and discipline, so that with these and by his own efforts, he may awaken within him the true beauties of the Spirit. Add your strength to his weakness, that he may overcome all selfish motives and unworthy desires. Help him in his self-taming, so that he may combat the tendency inherent in men towards anger, greed, and self-pity. Strengthen him, that he may overthrow the evils of tale-bearing, malice, and jealousy. Grant him the ability to see with the eye of understanding the defects and shortcomings of his brothers and to emulate their goodness. So this is the end of the chapter. And so here again, it's kind of highlighting some of our carnal desires like anger, greed, self-pity, malice, jealousy. And here it makes another reference to, grant him the ability to see with the eye of understanding, which is kind of that code of like, opening up your third spiritual eye. Okay, so now we're going to read through chapter 15 of the Book of Sons of Fire, which is called the Book of Kadmis. So this chapter gives us more insight into this secret brotherhood of the Sons of Fire, although in this chapter they're called the House of Men, which formed following Hoskaya's death. So what's interesting about this chapter is that we see how this secret brotherhood received additional books from the Children of Light that may have been more ancient than those written by Hoskaya. And so as we'll read through this chapter, it appears that they set what's called the laws of Amos as being above those that were set by Hoskaya. And it seems as though Amos is a prophet who was ancient, like even at the time of the flood. So, I mean, that's kind of wild to think about, right? Where like if the flood was 12,000 years ago, where we get to read about a prophet who was considered ancient even at that time. So like I mentioned in a few videos, we'll talk about those chapters in videos 17 and 18. But before reading through the chapters, like through this chapter, I'll just read through this one passage from a chapter that we'll talk about in video 17. So it says, "Yet, even the children of light have become divided among themselves, and one institution became two. The institution of the East claims it is the true guardian of the written records, but now we have books written even before those copied by the scribes of Hoskaya. We are not the children of lesser light, and we know the mysteries of the hidden light. Only we in the cold north will survive, for did not Amos write, our destiny lies in a much bleaker land, where our seed will be planted in strange soil. It will lie within the bosom of an untamed land until quickened to growth by the warmth in the desires of men." So, like I said, we'll read through this chapter in video 17, but this part here is, it's talking about sometime after Hoskaya, so like after the flood. But yeah, what's interesting here, it mentions how, yet even the children of light have become divided amongst themselves and one institution became two. So there's the institution of the East, and then there's those from the North, where that's the thing. So as we'll be talking in later videos, overall, the text of the Kolbrin seems to have followed those who became the institution of the North, which then later turned into ancient Egypt with Moses and then later Jesus. And it seems like they had branched off from the institution of the East in a much more ancient time. So, part of the reason I want to discuss it later is that, today we see, similarities, but also some differences between Eastern religions and Western religions. And this could be the reason where at one time there was the children of light. And then, even the comment here, you could kind of notice the tone a little bit where it says, we are not the children of the lesser light. So maybe kind of insinuating that those in the east were those of the lesser light compared to them. So, a little bit of drama there, I guess. But so yeah, we'll talk about that later. But I just wanted to go through this passage because it mentions Amos, and it so that's saying we'll go through a full chapter talking about Amos in video 17, but it's just anyways, it's quite fascinating, and I'll explain a little bit as we go through this chapter. So passages 2 to 6 speak of the new land where the house of men established themselves. So it reads here, "As man moves in air, so does God move in goodness. As God is incomprehensible to man, as mortal man, but comprehensible to him as man in spirit, so is God not a being with the mere attributes of men, but the supreme spirit among spirits. As man stands at the apex of material creation, so is the supreme spirit the ultimate unity above the spiritual sphere. So the supreme spirit is a reference to God. And that's the thing, to be honest, I myself included, I kind of almost prefer to refer to God as the supreme spirit. But we'll see, as we go through more chapters about the meaning of life and things like that, we'll see that it often makes a reference to the supreme spirit for God. So passage 3 here says, "From this day forward, we shall be known as the craftsmen of the Supreme Spirit, and this place, upon the waters of Glaith, which we call the Valley of Reeds, known to those about us as Karstflam, shall be called the smithy of the Supreme Spirit. The boundaries of the land pledged solely onto us are the waters below, upward of the mark post 3,002 score set paces, downward of the mark post 1,012 set paces. In the water and its division, you may fish and gather reeds and cut water, herbage over its further bank." This isn't terribly important. It's just kind of talking about the landmarks in this, secretive house that they had established somewheres. And it continues here. "Landward of the mark post, at 4,004 score and 10 paces, is the stone placed by Carlene, set upright, and there is the boundary to the east outward from this. 2,500 set paces on each side is placed a mark stone, set that all may recognize it. From these stones to the mark post on the water's edge are the boundaries north and south. Within the boundaries, the land shall be clear of trees and shall be pastured and sown, and therein we shall have our habitations. In the forest about us may be gathered wood, and swine may be fed there, and we may hunt." So anyways, and I'm not sure if I'm doing the best in terms of reading through these, but yeah, it's a little bit maybe confusing, but like I said, it's not terribly important. So passages 7 to 9 speak of the new house of men, and it appears from these passages that it follows a more, what we might consider more of a traditional priesthood, where the priest must either be single or they need to leave their families, once their son can take over the household. And this newly established brotherhood must follow strict rules, but ultimately it's the ancient writings that are the cornerstone of their ways. So it reads here, "The house of men shall remain as before, but no longer shall we be divided into parts. Men shall be made men as they have been in the past. If any man be in years, and without wife and children, or having a son who is a man placed in his stead, he may enter wholly into the house of men. No man shall absent himself from the house of men at his times, unless by dispensations of the house ruler, or if it be impossible for him to be there. But all time not served shall be served doubly later, unless with the dispensations of the house ruler it is waived." So, you can see there's a little bit of a strict rules where there's a house ruler to give permission to certain things. And then passage 9 here says, "The ruler and the council shall govern and judge in all things among us, but they shall not alter these decrees, which shall stand among us as a rock. We will govern our lives by them and abide by them and pass them on to those who follow. These, together with the words of the Holy Writ, are the candlestick and container for the immortal light of truth, which is among us. They shall be honored by all who walk in that light, now and henceforth. So now passage 10 to 13 speak of how the decrees will be written such that they are incorruptible. And they also declare that the laws of Amos come first, then the laws of Hosea. And then all the newer set laws may not be made more important than those from Amos and Hosea. So we also see that they followed the more ancient ways or traditions of Amos and not necessarily the newer ways of Hosea. So, I'll be talking more, I think, later about that. I have some thoughts on there, but essentially it seems like this house of men were quite strict. And like I said, once they acquired the more ancient books, they seem to have made the decision to put more preference on the older books, and then Hosea, and anything that came afterwards would be beneath the laws of Amos and Hosea. So here passage 10 reads, "They shall be written on copper made incorruptible and placed within the sacred urns, together with the records. Yet they shall remain with us and be among us written on tablets of wood. We shall keep the decrees of Hosea and abide by them and their punishments, though the punishments may be changed by the council, so that men are lashed with the whip and the women with leathern thongs or wands of wood. We now have with us the decrees of Amos, and they alone shall stand before those of Hosea. All other laws shall stand according to the order of their numbering." So I'll talk a little bit more about this near the end of this video about, it talks about their punishments and men being lashed and things like that. And it continues here. "Where laws are at variance, one shall not be sent against or set against the other, but that which is latest shall stand highest, in the others be subordinate. The decrees of the old law, which is not written, shall be kept only if their keeping be the custom in judgment. Let no man build a habitation of brick or stone upon these lands, for this is an unlawful thing unto the people within whom we dwell. If any decree be set against another, the last written decree shall prevail, except between the decrees of Amos and Hosea. Let no man change to his benefit the brand mark upon the beast of another, for this is an unlawful thing. If done, the wrong shall be adjusted by restoring double the value, and if done again, by restoring treble," which I think is 3 times. So now passages 14 to 20 state what every man of the Brotherhood shall do and learn. So here it reads, "Let no man among us worship otherwise than in the manner of our Brotherhood. To their rituals nothing shall be added, and nothing taken away. Our beliefs shall be supported manfully, without shame, and with all our strength. You shall not be faint-hearted when danger threatens, nor indifferent when hard pressed. No man among us shall be voiceless when our beliefs are ridiculed, or remain passive before their enemies. If anyone becomes a coward or fail in this, he shall not be numbered among us. The works of men are imperfect, and no man has ever seen the light of truth in absolute purity. Therefore, though 2 things within the body of our written records may appear contradictory, if not capable of reconciliation through greater understanding, the thing written later, unless a manifest error, shall be more acceptable. Be men of good faith, good will, and common sense. Nothing passing through the hands of many men escapes contamination. Only sincerity and diligence will maintain its purity. Nevertheless, having established something, uphold it in steadfastly. In this sphere of falsity, cling to every truth as a man swept out to sea by the river torrents cling to a log. All men held captive for anything they may have done, and not yet brought before the council or punished, shall be kept encaged at the water's edge. A man may be encaged as a punishment, and the cage either covered or uncovered. If a man must die, he may die either in clean or unclean waters. as is done by the people who surround us. No man shall draw blood to slay in judgment. A man shall take his brother's wife into his household, if his brother die and leave her unprotected. The unprotected of any man's bloodkin or lawkin shall become his responsibility. Inasmuch as the Lord of heaven mated with the Queen of heaven, brother and sister are not forbidden to each other under the old law. A man shall not gaze upon the nakedness of any of his bloodkin or lawkin in lust, and no woman shall expose her nakedness to any man, nor her husband. Punishments may be executed either by burning or the cage. Every man shall learn to fight and defend himself with the axe, the bow, the spear, the sword, the javelin, or the sling, and all weapons of the hand shall be sharpened. Every man among us shall know the words of the Holy Writ, by understanding of the writings or by memory. They shall be cut into his heart, as they are on copper and wood. So overall, that's the thing. I think that it's not sure what period or what generation this was written. Like I said, I'm quite sure it would have been sometime in between Osiris's generation and Moses with ancient Egypt, where again, this is like there's thousands of years in between them. So, like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about the whole punishments, and these are, it seems like this House of Men was quite strict. But ultimately, in terms of the good thing about it is that, or, of these people at the time, is that, it seems like they were essentially taking it very seriously, that they were the ones keeping the sacred writings, where here, like it says, they shall be cut into his heart, in terms of study the, I'm quite sure when it says Holy Writ, it's like the holy writings. So, ultimately, these people would have been studying the holy writings and to live them and to essentially inscribe them into their heart, like they would live by these writings. But yeah, this would have been a more ancient time, and it was a different time. Like we read, that's the thing. Even in Osiris's times, there was a lot of barbarians and a lot of uncouth people and stuff like that. So you could imagine that it would have been important to have institution of sorts who would maintain these writings and have follow strict rules and things like that. So passage 21 ends the chapter with an interesting statement where they changed the language of the written books from the letters of the sons of fire to the letters of the people of the 5 red gods. So it says here, the records shall now be written in the sacred characters and not in letters of the sons of fire. Line for line, the letters of the people of the 5 red gods shall be used. The letters from the sky signs seen by the master of writing. So I'm not sure if, I don't know, maybe there are certain historians or archaeologists who would know what this people of the 5 red gods might be. So it might give a bit of insight in terms of during what period or what civilization this would have been. But yeah, so that's essentially the last passage of this chapter, where passage 22 is simply a note that states that many following chapters are lost. So it's not clear whether this passage where it says many following chapters are lost means, chapters in the book of Kadmis, because this chapter is called the book of Kadmis, or does this mean that there's many chapters from the book of Sons of Fire that were lost? So yeah, like I said, I do want to talk a little bit about, the laws of Hoskaya, the laws of Amos, and the punishments and stuff near the end of this video. But before that, there's a few more chapters I'd like to go through. So next here, we're going to talk about, we're going to go through chapter 14 of the Book of Sons of Fire, which is the Rolls of Record 8. So this chapter describes a story of fighting between the Sons of Fire and different primitive tribes, which I'm quite sure is in the Eastern Quarter. So this chapter does not include Hoskaya, but below is a description of the characters, which helps to read through this chapter. So Kabul Kai is from the Sons of Fire, who if you remember when we read the Rolls of Record 2 earlier in this video, he was with Lothan. So I think this is how it links it to the Eastern Quarter. Amaradi is Cable Kai's sister and later his wife. And I put sister in brackets there. I think we read in the previous chapter. Actually, no, it'll be in video 6. We'll read about another story of Osiris where it says that Isis was made Osiris's sister before being married. So, when it says that Amaradi is Cable Kai's sister and later his wife, like it's not biological sister, I think there was a little bit of it's kind of meant to, bring them into the family before later marrying. So another character is Ramana, who's Amaradi's mother, who knows how to use herbs for healing. Cluth is a barbarian, and he's the son of Clada, and his tribe is called Cladwigan. And then Clada and his wife, who's just called the true wife of Clada, I guess kind of maybe the primary wife or first wife. And both of them are Cluth's parents and are also of the tribe Cladwigan. If anything, the name Clada and Cladwigan might be, the tribe might be called after their leader, Clada. And then later in the chapter, there'll be the Wictas, who are another barbarian tribe who battled the tribe of the Cladwigan. And, I'll just make a note by saying, actually, like, if there was any chapter in the Kolbrin, I remember, this was like over almost 5 years ago when I started to really study the text in the Kolbrin, and I started going chapter by chapter to put it in my report. And I don't know, I guess like I just kind of felt like going in order. So, as I was first writing my report, I went through like the Book of Creation, all the chapters, then the Book of Gleanings, all the chapters. And I remember when I got to this chapter, I think this was the first chapter that, like you could imagine once I clued into what the Kolbrin was, I was kind of like, I need to get this in writing and do what I can, because, like if you watch the introduction video with all of that, like I was kind of, shocked, and I was like, hey, I need to write this down. I need to, because I seemed like the only one who understood what these texts of the Kolbrin was. But anyways, the reason I say that is that when I got to this chapter, I was trying to go through it, and I had a lot of trouble going through it, where I think I actually like stepped away for a week or 10 days, where I was just like, I guess I got frustrated. Maybe I just needed a break. But anyways, that's the thing. I remember this chapter where, as we'll read through it, it was quite difficult at first because of all the different characters. But as we'll go through here, that's the thing. I think once you figure it out, then it becomes clear. So, we'll see, as I go through this chapter, I think it'll become quite clear what it's about. So passages 1 to 4 begin by introducing the characters. So we see how Amaradi learned the language of the barbarians, and she communicates with Cluth of the Cladwigan tribe. Cluth requested the help of Ramana since his mother, the true wife of Clada, was sick. So Ramana helps the true wife of Clada, and she begins recovering. However, the priests from the Cladwigan tribe did not like that Ramana was successful in helping to heal Clada's wife. So we'll see that through these passages here. So it says, the sister of Cable Kai was born in the house of Sothus, and her name was Amaradi. There were 4 children, and one still remains among us. Amaradi was said to be a lovely-faced woman. In the days when the city was being built, the barbarians came and went freely among us. Many came, but stood off and watched from afar, for they did not understand our ways. Among those who came was Cluth, the son of Clada and brother of Cladwigan, and he talked with Amaradi in the days when she was still in her father's household. So here again, you can see that Amaradi of the Sons of Fire was able to communicate with Cladwigan or Cluth in terms of communicating with this, more primitive tribe of people. So it continues here. In those days, she sat at the place of the talking stones, which still stands in its place, for she was among those who sought to know the speech of the barbarians. In the season of fruitfulness, the true wife of Clada was overcome with a sickness, which no one among her own people could cure, not even the wise men or priests who were able enough in such things. Therefore, Cluth came to Ramana, the mother of Amurati, who was known afar for her skill with herbs. Amurati came with Cluth to speak for him. When Ramana understood his needs, she and Amurati went with him, taking 2 armed men and men of the barbarians. The peace of Cladwiggan went before them. They came to the place where the true wife of Clada lay. On the evening of the 2nd day, the wise men and priests went among the people, muttering against the women, and dark looks were cast upon Ramana. So essentially here, and as we'll keep reading, so this is saying that, Cluth was concerned because his mother, the true wife of Clada, was sick. And, it does mention that these primitive tribes of people did have people who would have been considered, their own priest or wise people. And, it did make a note that they did have some sort of knowledge on healing and things like that. But essentially, they weren't able to figure out how to help the true wife of Clada. So Cluth had asked for Amurati and her mother Ramana to come because Ramana was known to be a good healer. But as I underlined here, it says, the wise men and priests went among the people, muttering against the women, and dark looks were cast upon Ramana. So, human nature being what it is. And, I find it quite fascinating because it seems like there's parts of our human nature that it's the same today compared to in very ancient times, even with Stone Age tribes, where they felt as though they felt threatened by Ramana because they didn't like the idea of like, oh, someone else is coming to heal them. Because, I guess they felt insecure about what that meant about their own capabilities. So passage 4 continues here. It says, the mother of Amurati cleansed the sick woman with ashes and made a brew of herbs and bitter bark of the river ash. She sat by the true wife of Clada, and in the morning, the sick body no longer burned, neither did it consume itself. So in terms of the sick body no longer burned, it's probably a reference to no longer having a fever. So it continues here. When the priests of the barbarians heard about it, they declared it was not a thing of goodness, but something brought about by evil arts. They told people a devil was loosed among them, whose trailing vapors they saw going among the huts. When darkness came that night, there were loud cries among the barbarians, for many were seized with weakness and vomiting, but this was something brought about by the priest and not by the devil. So overall, it seems to infer that the priest of the barbarians had purposely tried to sabotage Ramana, who was trying to help Cluth's mother, who was sick. So that's the thing. It seems as though the priest of the barbarians may have given something to some of the other people from the more barbaric tribe, and they became sick, and they wanted to say like, look, it's these people of the Sons of Fire who brought this sickness with them, right? So yeah, no, it's quite interesting if you think about this being over 12,000 years ago and a Stone Age tribe. Like I said, it's human nature, man. It really is something. So passage 5 and 6 show the aftermath, where the true wife of Clada decided to appease her tribe's priest and refused further care from Ramana. So because of that, Amurati and her mother Ramana leave with Cluth, but shortly after, Clada's wife dies, and then the tribal priests blame Ramana and Amurati, right? So we'll read through here. It says, among the barbarians, the priests were held in high regard, and so the true wife of Clada sought to appease them. She called the highest of the priests to her and asked him what should be done to make the evil depart and leave the people in peace. The priest told her that if the 2 foreign women were sent away, their evil and the devil would depart with them. He asked her to let her own people treat her after their own manner. He told her that the things which cured sickness in another race would not cure sickness in theirs. The true wife of Clada, seeking to avoid strife and being already half cured, said it would be done as he wished. Then passage 6 here says, So Amrati and her mother departed, together with their servants, and the armed men who accompanied them. On the night after they left, the true wife of Clada died, with vomit stopping in her throat. Then the priest made their voices heard among the barbarians and told them to behold the work of the devil, which remained among them. They said it had not departed, nor would it leave until it was appeased. They spoke in such a manner that men of the barbarians set out in haste and came upon the women and Cluth, who, with armed men, were preparing to leave their camping place. When Cluth heard the words of the priest spoken by those who came, he was dismayed and knew not what to do. There was a man among those who came who spoke many words to Cluth, so that he was stirred up against our women. For Cluth was a barbarian, and their ways were his ways, right? Because that's what's interesting, right? Like Cluth is from the, and it was his mother that died, right? Like he's from the barbarian tribe, but at the same time, he had developed a relationship with Amrati and her mother, so he was a little bit conflicted in what to do, right? Because all of a sudden the priests of the barbarians were telling him like, hey, these women were responsible for what happened and all the sickness. So he was a little bit confused in terms of what to do. So now this chapter notes that some 350 words are missing between passage 6 and 7, and it also says that many words are also lost between passages 7 and 8. So that's the thing. That's part of the reason why it's a little bit confusing, because there are passages missing in between. So it kind of skips ahead a little bit. So yeah, as we'll read in the next passage, 7 jumps ahead to where it appears that the people who were escorting Amrati are all dead, except for Amrati, her mother Ramana, who's wounded, and Cluth. And then Cluth appears to have saved Amrati, but his stubbornness may have led to casualties. It appears that the priest of the tribe wanted to take Amrati and make her the wife of someone from the barbarian tribe, but she refused since she had already pledged herself to another man, to Cable Kai. So the passage ends with a small parts in between missing words, but it paints a dreadful picture. So again, this is part of the reason why it was quite difficult to try and understand what this chapter is about. So this is what I think is happening, and we'll go through the chapters here. So here, after the missing words, it says it resumes. Amrati turned her face towards Cluth and told him that by strength alone he had brought her to this distant place and its stronghold, that through his stubbornness her people had died and her mother had been wounded. She said that though the priest called for the sacrifice of her modesty after the customs of his people, she was already made sacred to a man of her own and would rather die than be degraded. She asked him what would be his pleasure, and would it not be even less than that given by a woman with a price, who would at any rate be willing to please? What a small pleasure that is, set against the pleasures women can really give. So here, this is where in the passage you can see in brackets it says indistinct, then several lines missing. So then it moves to Cluth stood apart with his arms, and then there was more passages missing, and then it continues. The priest prepared the cage, and Amrati was fetched, and then some words missing. Stood by with dignified modesty. Her mother sat apart before the image, and then a large part was lost. So again, we're only getting, unfortunately, a lot was lost. But like I explained before, I'm quite sure here that essentially the people from the barbarian went after the women, where, again, we had read how there was Amrati, her mother Ramana, with Cluth, and a few, armed men of the Sons of Fire. But like it said here at the beginning, it seems as though because of Cluth's stubbornness, her people had died and her mother had been wounded. And then, this is where there's the parts missing, and the priest prepared the cage, and that's the thing, right? Like in the Rolls of Record 2 that we read earlier, when it mentioned how when Lothan was slayed, that 2 of their men were burnt in cages. So yeah, it paints a bit of a dreadful situation there. So passages 8 and 9 jump ahead to where Cluth and Amrati are held captive, But Ramana is no longer mentioned, so she presumably died. And then Amrati speaks of Cluth, where she says, as we'll read in the passage, she says, "Never had woman beheld a braver man, though a foolish one." So that's like, it must have been quite an interesting situation in terms of Cluth being from the barbarians, but he was quite interested in helping Amrati, and Amrati had found a way to communicate with him. So he seems like he would have been a strong, capable barbarian, and to some degree with a good heart. But at the end of the day, I mean, he was ignorant to some degree because he grew up in a barbaric tribe of sorts. So here in this passage, we'll see that, as it kind of fast forwards again, because there was a large part missing, it says that Cable Kai and other men came to save them. And eventually an old man reads omens, and it appears that the tribal priests who were holding Cluth and Amrati let them go. But now, as we'll read, regrettably, Cable Kai ends up disappearing in the woods. So, like I said, it's a bit of a confusing chapter, so I'm not sure how you're following along here, but yeah, so here passage 8 says, it begins again, right? So this is after a large part was missing. It says, "Away Cluth lay against the bole of the tree, and when they fetched her to him, he raised himself up. He hardly stood, for he was bloodied and weak." So he was injured, right? And then here it says, "Amrati told him that never had woman beheld a braver man, though a foolish one. Down at the water's edge lay Cable Kai, and the men who had cut the lashings of the structure laved his wounds." And passage 9 says, "The old man, who had read the omens and divided the people, bade those nearby to carry Cluth to the river bank. When they came nearby, Cable Kai had disappeared into the thickets of the forest. The men of Kelkilith remained on the other side." So now passages 10 and 11 have both groups working together to bury their dead. But then there is a battle with another group of barbarians who are called the Wictas. So we see how unfortunately Cluth is slain, and at the end they believe that Cable Kai was captured. So here it says, "They left the destroyed place and the buried dead behind them, and Amrati stayed in the keeping of the priest of Cladwiggan. In this manner they came to the place where Cladwiggan and his warriors were assembled to meet the enemy. They were received joyfully, but there was sorrow for Cable Kai, whose cunning had carried the day. They feared for him, thinking he had been taken by the Wictas. Cluth was slain in the battle with the Wictas and the men of broad knives, at the crossing of the river now called by the barbarians Cluthrad Drogwin." So yeah, it seems, whether or not there was like 3 tribes, the Wictas and then the men of the broad knives, at a river crossing. So yeah, it paints a quite dreadful picture. But where, Cluth was slain, but, it seems like afterwards, in honor of Cluth, it seems like he was quite admired. Like, even the Sons of Fire, like Amrati, made comments on his bravery. So they later called the crossing of the river Cluth Radoin after Cluth. So in passage 12, we find out what happened to Cable Kai, where we see he was severely injured. So it says, "Cable Kai was not taken, though he was sorely wounded. His face was torn from the blows of the spiked club, so that flesh hung loosely down. He was twisted, for his shoulder was broken when the logs fell upon him. So he remained hidden within the forest, the companions of beast, for his appearance caused men to shudder." Like, again, quite the dreadful picture, right? Where like his shoulders broken and his face was torn, where some of his flesh was flung loosely down. So, yeah. So now passages 13 to 15 speak of how Amrati found Cable Kai during a feast at the city. And again, it notes that some parts are missing, such as an image after passage 14 and 5 paragraphs after passage 15. But we'll read through what survived, I guess, in terms of the writings. It says, "When the leaves left the trees in the fall of the year, he came close into the city, near the boundary where Amrati was wont to sit, by the side of the flowing stream. In the winter, he was clothed with skins and moved hardly. At the time of the midwinter feast of the barbarians, the people of the city met them on common ground beyond the city and before the forest. Fires were lit, and there was feasting and revelry. Gifts were exchanged between the people of the city and the barbarians. So, despite all the fighting, it seems like they found a way to make peace. And that's the thing, things were quite volatile, it seems. But now passage 15 says, Amradi was sorrowful because of this and withdrew into some bushes close by the stream. With her were 2 hounds. The hounds smelled out Cable Kai, for he had come close, being drawn by the warmth and cheerfulness at the place of feasting. They leaped upon him gladly, for they knew him. Cable Kai sought to escape back into the forest, but Amradi caught him by the hand. She looked at him and fell on his neck with tears. She covered him with her cloak of Coney fur, and when her 2 attendants came, they carried him to a shelter place close by the stream. So yeah, it's quite sad that Cable Kai thought because he was all disfigured and things like that, he kind of stayed as a little bit of a recluse in the forest. But and this is what's interesting, where Amradi had dogs with her, and the dogs had known Cable Kai. So as we know today, that's the thing. Dogs can recognize people, especially through the scent. So anyways, it's quite sad that Cable Kai sought to escape back in the forest, but thankfully Amradi caught up to him, noticed who he was, and brought him back with them. So despite everything that happened, passage 16 has some wonderful news regarding Amradi and Cable Kai. It says, in the spring of the year, they returned as husband and wife and were welcomed with a great feast. They were remained within the house of Cable Kai. So yeah, I mean, look, everything was quite gruesome, but it's quite wholesome at the end. At least that's like, at the end of it, they were able to, live in peace and get married. So yeah. So passages 17 to 21 close the chapter speaking of how Cable Kai helped the Cladwiggan tribe rebuild the city, which was in the name of Cluth. Because again, it really does seem like they respected him, like both sides, and maybe that was that could have been the very thing that made it so that they both got along, was that they both respected Cluth, and in honor of him, they worked peacefully with each other. And so these passages also speak of a temple built which kept the light of truth. However, we'll read that the children of light left. So it says, the fortress of Cluth was built up again by Cable Kai, according to his promise, and the sons of Cluth live there in these days. It stands on high ground rising out of the waters, surrounded by high walls of logs. The city was built and finished with a wall, which was 2 walls of wood with soil between. Men came in ships with cloth and pottery, with things of metal and shells and beads. The barbarians gave much for cloth, dyed scarlet, for their tree blue is not fast in cloth. So again, it shows that maybe another part of the reason why the tribe wanted to work with the Sons of Fire was that they had certain things which they brought with their ships that happens today too, or at least not that many generations before, where that's the thing. It seems like that's a pretty common thing in our history, where trade seems to be a way that people would work in peace, because if some people had certain items or resources that another wanted, they were encouraged by that. And it continues here where, because it mentioned here that the barbarians gave much for cloth dyed in scarlet. So here it says, scarlet is made nowhere except in the land of the Sons of Fire, where a white fish turns scarlet under the warmth of the sun. Men say that those who bring the scarlet cloth declare it to have been found in this manner. So anyways, I'm not a historian or anything, but like these would have been from over 12,000 years ago. So here it explains how they discovered how to make scarlet dye. It says, a man was out hunting with his dog, and while they walked along the strand, the dog caught a fish which it carried to its master in its mouth. The man saw a scarlet stain on the dog's mouth and wiped it away with a piece of linen. When the color could not be withdrawn from the cloth, it was taken to a dyer who sought out the thing that had made it. And that's the thing, especially in more primitive times. And I mean, even as today, we enjoy nice, vibrant colors. So, maybe today we're a little bit, because we're spoiled with, everything like that. It's not as big of a deal. But you could imagine in ancient times that having a scarlet dyed cloth would have been, I mean, we're attracted to beauty and things like that, right? So but yeah, so maybe this is it shows too how in our history where a lot of things are discovered by accident, where this was an accident where it was someone was hunting with his dog, the dog caught a fish, and it seems I guess the fish's blood stained the cloth and it would remain, so then they used it as dye. And passage 19 here says, the temple was built within the city and raised up on logs. Beside it was the place of instruction, and just before it was the place of exchanging. It stands today as a sanctuary and a center for those who seek the light. In its keeping are the records of the children of light, who are the children of the written word. So ultimately, I mean, like we discussed earlier, one of the mandates of the Sons of Fire was ultimately they wanted to create establishments where, that's the thing, I guess they understood that if they created a settlement where people could learn, then especially the later generations, right? Because that's the thing, if children are born from the barbaric tribe, but they learn, then they'll grow up to be more learned and progress and things like that. And then here, passage 20 says, but all is not well within the heart and spirit of the city, which is the people. A city lives not by the wood and stones with which it is built. Therefore, since the coming of Salmon of the Barnhoi and those who follow Ameth, we who are the heart of the children of light prepare our departure. The first books we leave in the temple with those who guard them, but we have made other books which will go with us. In another place we will make them incorruptible. And here it says there's a piece missing, and then it says, this we leave with you, as we also take it with us, so that it may not be lost. The names are written and the seals placed. So, it seems like this chapter, I wonder if it's talking about the same city that Hosea was talking about, where he says, unfortunately, the city's not working as they intended, where they had intended for the people of the city to really focus on the spiritual teachings from the children of light, but it turned into a little bit more of a marketplace where people were more interested in the material luxuries. And but yeah, so this is the end of the chapter. So I hope that was okay to follow along. Like I said, especially with the pieces missing, it could be a little bit confusing. But the reason I wanted to include it here is that it's one thing to read stories of the ancient times where there's a little bit more of a mythology, or it paints a bit of a nicer picture to some degree, but reading through this really helps to show the situation that the Sons of Fire were in, where again, these are people from the generation who survived the flood, where there were limited people who survived, and it really shows how difficult things were when they were trying to establish themselves with primitive human beings. So and like I said, this could be some of the most ancient history that's documented. Ancient history, I believe, is defined as around 3500 BC, which was where the earliest text, and I think it was from Egyptian texts that document our history. But if the texts of the Kolbrin are authentic, and this is talking about potentially over 12,000 years ago, if, again, the 12,000 years is based off of the potential link between the cosmic impact which caused the flood being tied to the Younger Dryas hypothesis, like we discussed in video 3. But anyways, yeah, this really paints an interesting picture about how things were in very ancient times. Okay, so we're going to go through one more chapter for this video here, and it'll be a little bit of a nicer chapter as opposed to because yeah, the previous one, like I said, it's quite a brutal situation that it described there. So yeah, we're going to read through chapter 19 of the Book of Sons of Fire, which is called Letter of Mata, a son of Agner. So this is an interesting chapter since it speaks of how the enlightened people of the Sons of Fire should teach the barbarians knowledge about God, the Supreme Spirit. So while I would not, consider us readers as barbarians, especially after reading the previous chapter, which described like actual barbarians, this chapter does deliver a lot of wisdom regarding God and our souls. So it's difficult to determine when this chapter was originally written. Again, I think it was likely sometime between the Sons of Fire, between like Osiris's and Moses's generation. So passage 1 includes how the Sons of Fire should describe the Supreme Spirit to the barbarians. And then passage 2 makes an analogy using looking at the sun to explain that it is not possible to see God. So here passage 1 says, the barbarian asks, who and what is the Supreme Spirit? Say unto him, conceive it as a being even above your greatest God. If it helps in your understanding, see the Supreme Spirit as a God reflecting his image as yourself. It is he who fills heaven and earth with his might, and his powers are displayed in the elemental forces. He is now as in the beginning and will be no different after the end. He formed men by building an earthly structure around a heavenly seed, and into this he infused the vapors of life. He maintains the order of the heavens and stabilizes the land of the waters. His breath is the breath of life, and he causes water to fall and greenery to live. Say to the barbarian, look about you and see God reflected as in a mirror. No mortal man has ever looked upon him directly, but his reflection may be seen with immunity. And then passage 2 says here, the barbarian seeks a God he can see, but try and make him understand. This is impossible because of God's very greatness and the littleness of man. Take the barbarian out next time the sun shines at its strength, and ask him to gaze upon it. He will be forced to admit that it is beyond his powers to do so. Then say unto him, see, it is beyond your power to look upon even the shield behind which Hala hides himself because of his brightness. Yet, even this great God is no more than a faint, far-off reflection embodying the ray-carrying power of the Supreme Spirit. How then could you hope to look upon the source of power itself? So I think I actually explained this in video 1, but essentially it shows how the Sons of Fire would try to teach the barbarians through practical ways. So essentially they're saying, on a day where the sun shines brightly, tell the barbarian to try looking at the sun. And I mean, don't try doing that because we know it could damage our eyes. But essentially that's the thing, right? It's saying like, if you can't even stare directly at the sun, how can you hope to look at God who is much, much greater than even the sun itself? So passage 3 helps to understand that the many mythical stories from ancient times were guided by the enlightened people of the Sons of Fire, since they understood that stories were the best way to teach the barbarians. So here passage 3 says, the barbarians are still children, and these things do not easily come within their understanding. Because of this, it may be best if they were taught by simple tales, like children, and so brought into the light gradually. A belief in the Supreme Spirit is of no great importance. An inquiry into his nature by the ignorant is purposeless and foolishness. It is of much more importance to men that they believe in their own souls. Belief in a God of any sort without belief in the immortality of man and his godlikeness serves no end. If a God existed without man deriving any benefit from his existence, it would be better for man to ignore him. This, however, is not the case. Man seeks unity and communion with the Supreme Spirit only for his own benefit. Man has a destiny founded in something greater than himself, and hence his need for that something. So I think this is actually quite an important point in terms of understanding spiritual wisdom. I mean, first, this underlying part, it helps to understand why, like all of the religions we have today, it's just we need to be very cognizant that these are stories, right? So, like, even in the Bible, it's a lot of stories, and this was done by purpose by these enlightened sons of fire because, I mean, for various reasons. I guess one way you could think of it is that their intent was that they wanted these stories because, in a way, these stories had to be interesting, where the people would want to pass it down generation to generation. So their intent was to hide elements of the truth. Again, this is the whole like truth veiled as opposed to unveiled. So they were taught by simple tales. And here it says a belief in the Supreme Spirit is of no great importance. And that might seem kind of strange, right? Like, why would it not be important to believe in God? And how it's more important that they believe in their own souls, like it says here. And I think the reason for that is because ultimately, if human beings believe that their our true being is a eternal soul, then that's kind of the catalyst in terms of, if you believe that you're an eternal soul, then it helps with understanding that, okay, well, after death on earth, we undergo a judgment of some sort. So as long as you believe that you are an eternal soul, that was more important in terms of helping people understand that they need to strive and live a good life. Because if you care about the state of your soul, which again, if you believe that you're an eternal soul, that pushes you more to be a good person because, and maybe it's taking advantage of people's like selfishness in some way where it's like, oh, like I want my soul to go to the light side of heaven after death. So that becomes the greater motivation to live a good life, which is important because, again, it's all related where it's by living a good life that your soul is molded in a way so that in heaven, it'll be guided to the light side as opposed to the dark side. So now passages 4 and 5 explain that we need to do more than just believe in God. Essentially, we must live in alignment with His will for us. Essentially, we need to be walking with God. So here, passage 4 reads, "The existence of a supreme being is not just something to accept, believe in, and ignore. A belief, faith alone, cannot be ends in themselves, for nothing exists without purpose. Simple belief in a supreme being is not enough. We must know the purpose or intention of the being. If we believe this Supreme Spirit created us, however this was brought about, we must seek to discover the purpose behind our creation. If we were created to serve some purpose, to do something we were intended to do, we must do it or earn our Creator's displeasure. Does the potter keep the pot unless for its purpose? Or the smith keep unwrought metal? Only things which serve the purpose for which they were intended and kept are cherished. Therefore, we who are brothers were taught not only to believe in a Supreme Spirit, but also in our similarity to Him. The Supreme Spirit is not a stranger beyond our ken. The powers of the Supreme Spirit infuse every fiber of our bodies." And now passage 6 explains why it is difficult to convince people to change their beliefs, as sometimes their incorrect beliefs allow for a more pleasurable life on earth. However, it does not sustain their soul. So here it says, "If we have difficulties among the barbarians, the difficulties here are no less. The truth we have seem not only unpalatable, but also indigestible. Men seek tastier food even though it is less sustaining, and few replace the brothers who depart. Would we serve better if we presented truth as a draught diluted with water and honey?" So this kind of ties into what I was saying before about why they taught the people with stories. And it seems like it was a fine balance between they wanted the stories to still maintain enough of the truth so that people were interested in it. But like it says here, it's kind of difficult because if they were to just tell him the truth that like, hey, life's meant to be difficult, you have to, live as you should and strive and labor and help your neighbors and all that stuff, it's people would be a little bit turned off from that, especially if it's people who, I mean, this were a more ancient time with barbarians, so maybe today it's a little bit more easier to understand. But yeah, this really helps to show that they were kind of walking a fine line between trying to find a way to teach the people a way of life that they would sustain and not turn away from. But at the same time, they couldn't dilute it too much or else it wouldn't serve a purpose. Okay, and passage 7 is a passage which seems to be practical advice about how to avoid the wrath of the barbarian king. So it really helps to illustrate that the Sons of Fire had to sometimes make concessions in order to ensure that the primitive people adopted their virtues. So here it says, "The threat of the barbarian king is something upon which you shall be counseled. If you are threatened with the alternatives of death or transgressing our laws, you may transgress them within reason and the bounds of conscience. If, however, you are required to deny all that you hold to be good and true, to betray all that we hold sacred, then you must accept death for the sake of your own soul. You will be informed about these things by a Kuin of Abalon, who comes later, so only the things you inquire about are answered." So here, like I underlined, it says that, if you had to transgress the ways of the Sons of Fire by a little bit, then it's okay. But if you're in a situation where the barbarian king puts you in a situation where you either bend the rules too much in order to save your life, then it would be better for you to accept death for the sake of your soul. And I think the reason for that is because they understood, again, they knew that they were teaching primitive tribes and this could impact this tribe for generations upon generations. So if ever they transgressed too much and bent the wisdom too much just to appease the barbarian king, then I guess they saw it as a risk where it's like, hey, look, you might be almost, well, not damning, but you might be like screwing over generations upon generations of this tribe of people, because then you would be leading them into a wrong direction. And so that's why ultimately they said, like, it's better for you to accept death for the sake of your soul, which, I mean, today that might seem a little bit like, oh, really? Like, give your life away for that? But as we dive into the passages about the meaning of life and our soul and heaven and all that, that's the thing. Ultimately, and I spoke about this in the introduction video, where ultimately we're not supposed to fear death. Like, that's the thing. It's death to some degree is just a graduation day where we undergo judgment. So that's the thing, these people understood that death isn't the end of our life. And if anything, that was kind of one of the big things they were trying to teach the people. So as, for us today, and that's the thing, because of our spiritual immaturity today, I think it would seem like, oh, really? You would give your life just instead of maybe appeasing the barbarian king? And it's like, yeah, because the damage that could be done to future generations, to future souls, is too much. And if you die while serving God, then you have nothing to fear. Like, you'll be okay, right? Like, you're not going to go to hell and things like that. So now passage 8 may help us understand why in today's religions we refer to God as God and not as the Supreme Spirit. So here it says, "For the sake of the barbarians, it is perhaps best to call the Supreme Spirit God, the God without a name. This will solve some difficulties. And if the barbarians think themselves superior because they contain him within a name, let it be so and hold yourself in peace." So who knows, maybe this was the origin of why we call God God, right, instead of the Supreme Spirit. So passage 9 is an analogy explaining that God fills everything, similar to how our soul fills our human body that's made of matter. And it also has a notion of how God experiences creation through our souls, similar to how we sense the earth through our material senses. So this aligns with the concept that within us is a fragment from God, where, like I said, when we go through the passages in later videos, it does describe that our soul is an actual fragment from God, but at the same time, we ourselves are not God. So here it says, Say to the barbarian, as the soul of man fills his body, so does God fill his domain. As the soul surrounds and contains the body, so it is with God and his creation. As the soul sees but cannot be seen, so does God see without being seen. As the soul feels, so does God. As the soul oversees the nourishment of the body, so does God revitalize the whole of his habitation. As the soul occupies an unfindable place within the body of man, so is the residence of God unfathomable. No man can know the seat of the soul, and no man can know the seat of God. So passages 10 and 11 are a reminder that even those with a more enlightened understanding of the Supreme Spirit are also creating an image of God and trying to make him more understandable, which is similar to the barbarians. So anyways, like I said, we need to go through like all the texts of the Kolbrin, and especially those from Jesus, to like really grasp all of this. But it does seem as though there's a process where, as we continue to develop our understanding of God, God will be pulled back further away from us. So, anyways, I'll talk more about that when talking about the meaning of life and all that. But overall, we need to accept that we will never truly understand God while on earth, but it's our destiny to keep increasing our understanding of him, as it will pull us, as individuals and as a whole, higher towards divinity. So, I mean, I made a note here where, God really thought of everything when establishing the great law of his wonderful creation. Because, essentially when you think about it, like as we search and try to reach out to God, once we advance and get to where we thought would be the end of the journey, then we realize, oh, actually it's more complex than that, and God is further away. So that's the thing, is as long as you're searching out God in a positive way, then it'll continue forever, like both in our lives today and I think even in heaven. It'll just, the more you search out God, the closer you get to him, the more, like, the better you become, because you're walking in the direction of God. But at the same time, we will never ever reach, like, it's impossible. Like, God, the Supreme Spirit, is the greatest being who has ever existed and who will ever exist. Like, it's impossible for any souls of human beings to become as great as him. But as we search God and try to go into his direction, we become more like God. So we become better and better, but again, we'll never attain the supremeness of God, the Supreme Spirit, essentially. So yeah, anyways, here passage 10 reads, "The barbarians make images of God to make him more understandable. Are we much better, who make images of him in our likeness within our thoughts? Not perhaps because we believe him so, but to make him more understandable. As man's understanding of God increases, so does God recede, so that though through the ages man comes to understand God better, he ever keeps the same distance away. We who dwell in the light of the Supreme Spirit have come closer to understanding, not because we are better men, but because we have devoted our lives to the search. If any man seek carefully and diligently enough, he must find whatever it is he seeks." So while this wisdom might be quite ancient, because it's talking about teaching barbarians, passage 12 that we'll read below here indicates that these were rewritten at some time and some parts of the letter are missing. So it says, "The rest of this letter is missing, but on a small recovered scrap dealing with buildings, it refers to Kailedy. Elsewhere, it is stated that Kailedy rewrote it." So again, like everything in the Kolbrin here, it's unfortunate that there's fragments that at some time in our history became lost, but at the same time, it's really great that some of it did survive for us to read today. Okay, so that was the last full chapter that we'll go through as part of this video. So yeah, just kind of to recap. So the chapters that we read in this video, which is part 2 about Osiris and the Sons of Fire, it was more focused on the Sons of Fire and especially their travels to the Eastern Quarter in very ancient times, which, like I said, could be over 12,000 years ago. So the next video will cover additional chapters that speak directly about Osiris, including passages that speak of Isis and their son Horus. And then after that, we'll move to videos about Moses and ancient Egypt. But then later in videos 17 and 18, we'll go through additional discussion of the ancient times before and after the flood. Because there are more chapters, but like I said a few times, I think it's worth going through Moses and then Jesus and then go back to talk about these chapters of more ancient times. So yeah, I mean, like I say, it'll be easier to have more discussion on what may have happened over our human history once we finish through reading, a lot more of the chapters about the Kolbrin. But one topic that I mentioned before, especially when we were going through that chapter of the House of Men and the Brotherhood, where it talks about punishments, I do want to speak a little bit more about that. Like I said, there's a lot to discuss when it comes to that, so we'll be talking about it more later. But I do want to touch a little bit on it as we close this video here. So yeah, from chapter 15 of the Book of Sons of Fire that we read in this video, it says, we shall keep the decrees of Hoskaya and abide by them and their punishments. Though the punishments may be changed by the council so that men are lashed with the whip and the women with leathern thongs or wands of wood, we now have with us the decrees of Amos, and they alone shall stand before those of Hoskaya. All other laws shall stand according to the order of their numbering. So there's actually chapters in the Kolbrin that speak of these laws of Amos, which, like I said, these are from before the flood. And there's also chapters that talk about the laws of Hoskaya, which were set by Osiris after the flood. And they do seem quite cruel. So we'll go through a few here. So it says here, and this is from the laws of Amos, it says, "It is decreed that if any man will not bear witness to murder, to theft, or to adultery, he shall not go unpunished. If he bears false witness according to his own understanding before the flame and shrine, if it be grievous, he shall lose his tongue." And then the next passage here says, "It is decreed that if any man make a false accusation of adultery against his wife, without just cause and without her acting indiscreetly, he shall receive 70 lashes." And then here's a passage from the laws of Hoskaya. It says, "It is unlawful for a woman to show her breasts to the eyes of men, not of her household. If the forbidden be done, she shall be burnt between the breasts after the manner of burning women." Right? So these are quite intense physical punishments. So, as we've read throughout this video, it was at a time when some humans were actual barbarians, since this was during the Stone Age. And so there's actually quite a few laws listed where the chapter Laws of Amos, which is chapter 5 of the Book of Sons of Fire, has 116 passages. So interestingly, when studying these passages, there is actually a lot of good wisdom, and it's understandable how these punishments were deemed necessary at the time because, keep in mind, they didn't have resources for prisons and things like that. So if people would become quite evil and run amok and there's no police and things like that, it just, having people act in unlawful ways and things like that, it would be quite detrimental to the nation or the communities. But, as we'll discuss in chapters about Moses and ancient Egypt, which will be video 7 to 9, those with Moses also had laws that were deemed necessary at the time. So, this helps us to understand why a lot of old religious texts, including the Old Testament, do contain rules and laws that do seem cruel to us today. So I do want to go through those. That's the thing. It's over this 24 video series I'm putting together. It's to focus on some of the main chapters that talk about if you watch video 1, you'll see what all the videos I've planned out are about. But after those 24 videos, I do want to make more videos where we'll go through the other text, and some of it is, going through these laws of Amos and of Hoskaya. And that's the thing. I think it'll be better to go through these laws after going through the text of the Kolbrin, especially related to Jesus and about those regarding God, heaven, our souls, and the meaning of life. Now, the thing is that some of these laws illustrate how they were reasonable despite how cruel the punishments seem. So, this is from the Laws of Amos. It says, "It is decreed that if a man commit adultery with his son's wife or his wife's mother, both shall die by stoning. If a married woman commit adultery, both she and the man with whom she committed it shall die. A husband may ransom his wife, but if he does, he shall be cast out from the people, lest he bring corruption upon them. When a woman is ransomed for adultery, he who shared the blame with her shall not die, but he shall not go unpunished. When judging the adulterer or adulteress, the whore and the whoremonger, deal with them strictly and without compassion, for they are the enemies of love. They place man back among the beasts. A fornicator should not marry a chaste woman, but it is not forbidden. A whore shall not marry among the children of light. The sins of whoredom are unforgivable, but those who truly show repentance over many years may be accepted back into the children of light. A woman who becomes a whore to feed a starving child has committed no great wrong. The wrongdoing is by the people." So, I mean, most of this passage here, like I said, like there's the cruel punishments in terms of like both shall die by stoning and, shall die and things like that. But the underlined part at the end here, where it says a woman who becomes a whore to feed a starving child has committed no great wrong. The wrongdoing is by the people. So, like I said, it'll be easier to go through these laws after going through the text related to Jesus. But like I said, there is a lot of wisdom that we could get from these laws, so it is worth studying still. But they're not meant for us to live by today, right? Like they understand that if a woman becomes a whore to feed her starving child, that's okay, because I mean, you have to understand that a woman's willing to do anything to help her children, and if a child's starving, the wrongdoing is by the people. Like, why is there a situation where children are starving? So most of the texts within the Kolbrin are based on Osiris's generation, Moses' generation, and during Jesus' time, including Joseph of Arimathea in Britain. And so, unfortunately, there are large gaps in terms of piecing together our human history. However, it becomes clear that the ancient stories have been recycled with Moses, where essentially Moses rewrote the sacred writings into the books we have today, such as the book of Genesis. So yeah, we'll go through a chapter in the next video, part 3, about Osiris that was written by Moses. And it also resembles the story of Moses receiving the 10 Commandments, which is not spoken of in the chapters of the Kolbrin about Moses. So the reason I want to bring this here is that just to point out how it, a lot of these ancient texts seem to have been recycled over the years. So studying this helps us understand our current religious texts like the Old Testament. But, at the same time, that's the thing, like, because of it, it kind of caused some, I don't want to say, well, ignorance, I guess, to some degree, but yeah, that's the thing, in today we read in the Old Testament about Moses going up on the mountain and receiving the 10 Commandments. And even today, I mean, like, I know there's places, I think it's like in Texas where they, anyways, I mean, that's a discussion for later, but they've put it into laws like their government where I think schools need to put up the 10 Commandments. And, but that's the thing, like Moses in these texts didn't actually receive the 10 Commandments, but I think it was a story element that was recycled because here there's this passage from a chapter we'll read in the next video that says, "Later, Osiris went up into the sacred high place and there learned the ordinances for the well-being of man. He was given the rules for safeguarding the sacred mysteries, and he was also shown the workings of the great law. When he came down, he chose the best of those about him and appointed the Council of Light, which numbered 24. So I think this is a fairly apparent similarity with the idea of like Moses going up to the mountain and receiving the 10 Commandments from God, right? Like Osiris went up to the sacred high place and there he learned the ordinances for the well-being of man. He was given the rules for safeguarding the sacred mysteries, and he was also shown the workings of the great law. And then when he came down, from the mountain, right? So that's the I just wanted to mention that because, like, I mean, how I like, I mean, look, not to criticize the Ten Commandments, but essentially it was really just rules that was meant to say, like, do good things and don't do bad things. And like we just read from some of the laws of Amos and the laws of Hosea, where there's some cruel punishments. So, anyways, I just wanted to bring this up because I think there's a lot of good that could come out of these scriptures in the Kolbrin, because by studying them carefully, it really helps to piece everything together and understand. And that's the thing, especially when we go through the chapters about Jesus and those about the meaning of life and all that. Like, we're not meant today to live by the Old Testament laws. And unfortunately, today, there's still people who say, like, oh, it's in the Bible, we have to do this. And it's like we read today, you know, some of the chapters in the Eastern Quarter, like, these came from incredibly ancient times when humanity was, I mean, it was actually in the Stone Age, it seems, right? Like, it makes references to barbarians. And anyways, you know, there was a lot of chapters or the passages painted a really gruesome picture of what humanity was like at the time. So anyways, I just wanted to bring that up, you know, after going through the chapters we did in this video, where it's just, there's a lot we could learn from these, and it helps us understand our current religious text. And, you know, today we're not, I mean, in some ways we're spiritually sick in terms of the way we're living our lives, but it's not the same as the barbarians. And because a lot of people are more educated today, it's just, we're able to live in a way where we don't have to rely on these cruel punishments. Whereas today, there's still some people who will point to the Old Testament and be like, oh, it's in the Bible, we must live this way. And it's like, no, we're not. But anyway, so yeah, like I said, there's a lot to go through with all the text in the Kolbrin. But another example where which I find fascinating. So, like we just went through, where it seems like the story of Moses going up and getting the 10 Commandments is actually a story related to Osiris, which was much more ancient. So here's another example. So, you know, another big story with Moses is the whole, like, Ark of the Covenant. And even today, people are like, you know, have all sorts of ideas and thoughts like that. So there's actually a bit of a, I mean, I call it a bit of a random scroll, because, yeah, like in the Book of Scrolls and the Book of Manuscripts, there's a lot of chapters that are a little bit random in the sense of, you know, it just, here's a scroll and here's what it contains. But yeah, there's chapter 7 of the Book of Manuscripts is only 4 passages, and we'll go through it here, where it speaks of 4 great arcs. So it says here, this is the manner whereby the sacred recordings shall be kept, and their number is 12 books and 442 scrolls. 4 copies shall be made, and each shall be rolled on a stick of blackwood. Each shall be enclosed with a pickled skin, and bound with a leathern thong. It shall be placed with spices in a box of copper, which shall be enclosed in a box of wood, bound about with hide and pitched. At each of the 4 appointed places shall be 4 hewn masonry receptacles, within which shall be contained the great arcs. They shall be kept by the guardians of the 4 quarters of the earth, and no copy shall be made, except one be destroyed. So essentially saying that they're making 4 of these great arcs. There's 4 appointed places across the world where there would be these arcs, and like it strictly says, you know, no copy shall be made except one be destroyed. Which again, like we talked a little bit in other videos, it really does seem as though they purposely kept these hidden for the secret society. And there's one more passage here where it says, nothing shall be added and nothing taken away from the books, except it be done according to the books, and the signs of the books shall be counted according to the custom of writing. So yeah, like I say here, there's like these are the only passages in this chapter that's just called Third Egyptian Scroll. So there's no real clues to help date when these 4 great arcs were established in the 4 quarters of Earth. Now, I guess before moving to what I have here to close the or to close this video, the reason I wanted to bring this up is, well, first of all, I mean, this these texts within the Kolbrin, like I said, I really do think this is like the biggest discovery when it comes to like manuscripts and religious books like in our human history, where it's like, because like the chapters that we read about Osiris and like the book of creation, these would have been books in the great arcs. And today, unfortunately, there's all these wild ideas about the Ark of the Covenant and stuff like that. So that's the thing. In the same way about, like I said before, about Moses going up on the mountain and receiving the 10 Commandments, like we're not meant to look at things in the Bible like, oh, the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, the first Indiana Jones movie with the Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, I love that movie and stuff, but at the end where there's this whole big thing that happens and the people die, it's just it's not this all powerful thing in terms of like magic in this material world, but at the same time, like it's humanity's greatest treasure because it contains the sacred writings of like which contain our history, but more importantly, the sacred wisdom of the great prophets, right? So yeah, like I said, there's a lot to go through, but yeah, I mean, for those who have been watching these videos, hey, we've actually been going through the contents that were within these great arcs. But yeah, like I said, there's discussions to be had about like where we are today and how people are interpreting some of these things. And like I said, there's gonna be a lot of revelations when people become aware, like in terms of like society as a whole, when and again, hopefully you people watching these videos, if you're in a situation where you could help bring awareness to this, please help. I'm just trying my best here. I put the report together. I'm putting these videos together. So yeah, I'm trying here, but I definitely need some help. So if you can help, please help. But anyways, I'm kind of talking a lot in circles here, but so again, like I'm just one person who's trying to interpret these, but I can't help but think that these 4 great arcs, like, so when we talk about Osiris, it seems like Osiris would have visited 3 places where he would have impacted those who later became the ancient Egyptians. He went to the eastern quarter, and when it talked about the land of the sons of fire, I think that would be the north quadrant, I guess, but there's nothing in here to say that he went west in terms of to the western continent, like the Americas and stuff. So that's the thing. In terms of these 4 great arcs, I think that, at least one thing to consider would be that, it might be related to the many civilizations which began to appear around 3100 BC, because both Stonehenge and Newgrange in Britain, which is the north, date back to around 3100 BC. The founding of ancient Egypt is around 3100 BC. And while the Mayan civilization only officially began around 2000 BC, the Mayan calendar's starting point is equivalent to August 11th, around 3100 BC. And in the eastern quarter, the Kali Yuga started around 3100 BC. So maybe 31 BC was a time when the Sons of Fire decided to push ahead and spread the sacred writings to help civilizations work together and thrive instead of living in more barbaric ways. But again, like this would be at one period where a lot would have happened between Osiris's generation and 3100 BC. So anyways, I'll close with that. Hopefully this isn't too confusing, but I mean, I hope for those of you who happen to be watching these videos are excited, because like I said, I mean, we're reading through some of the scriptures that would have been in these great arcs. And so I'll just leave it at that. Like I said, once we go through all these texts, then that's when we could maybe have a little bit more discussions on what does it mean for us today, and what are all the revelations that come with this book? I mean, for those who've watched video 1, I guess you probably understand there's, especially when we'll get to the chapters that talk about Jesus. But yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you in video 6, where we'll close off this 3-part videos talking about Osiris, and then we'll move on to Moses and ancient Egypt. So I will see you later.